You stand at the threshold of a great stone corridor, and the cold finds you first. It always does in these places. The chill seeps through layers of wool and linen, through the thick tapestries hanging along the walls, through centuries of accumulated stillness. You feel it in your fingertips, in the hollow of your throat, in the space between your shoulder blades where no cloak ever quite manages to reach. This is the cold of a January morning in a palace built when comfort was not yet a word that belonged to architecture, when walls were made thick not for warmth but for war, when windows were narrow slits designed to keep arrows out rather than to let light in. The year might be 1410 or 1520 or 1650. The specific decade matters less than the season, less than the fundamental truth that winter in these halls is a living presence, patient and persistent, waiting in every corner where firelight cannot reach. You are a person of rank here, neither servant nor sovereign, but someone who belongs to this world of stone and ceremony. Perhaps you serve in the royal household, or perhaps you are a minor noble granted chambers within the palace walls, or perhaps you are a scribe, a tutor, a lady-in-waiting. The exact title matters less than your proximity to power, your daily witness to how those who wear crowns negotiate with cold. You have learned to move through these spaces with a particular awareness, an alertness to temperature that becomes second nature when you live in buildings designed for defense rather than comfort, when every degree of warmth must be captured, cultivated, defended against the hungry winter air. The corridor stretches before you, and you begin to walk. Your footsteps echo softly against flagstones worn smooth by generations of similar journeys, and you pull your cloak tighter, though you know it will do little good. The tapestries along the walls shift slightly in drafts that never quite cease, their woven hunting scenes and biblical tableaus rippling, as if the figures within them shiver too. These hangings are not merely decorative, though their rich colors, faded now to subtle variations of rust and gold and deep forest green, please the eye. They are armor against the cold, heavy wool barriers hung inches from the stone to create pockets of trapped air, dead spaces where the winter cannot fully penetrate. You have seen servants taking them down in summer, rolling them carefully, storing them in dry chambers until autumn returns. You have seen how much colder the halls become without them, how the stone seems to breathe its chill directly into the air. Somewhere ahead, there is warmth. There is always warmth somewhere in a palace, carefully hoarded in specific chambers, radiating from specific sources. But it is never general, never ambient, never something you can take for granted. Warmth in winter is a destination, not a condition. It is something you travel toward, something you position yourself near, something that must be constantly fed and tended and negotiated for. The democracy of modern heating, where entire buildings maintain uniform temperature regardless of room or status, belongs to a future you cannot imagine. Here, warmth is hierarchical. It pools around power. It accumulates in the chambers where kings and queens conduct their winters, and it diminishes as you move away from those centers, growing thinner and more tentative until, in the outer reaches of the palace, in the guardhouses and the sculleries and the attic chambers where the lowest servants sleep, it barely exists at all. You think of this as you walk, because the cold makes you think of it, because your body is already performing the calculations it has learned to make in these winter months. How long until you reach warmth? How much cold you can endure, where you might pause to find a lesser source of heat if the journey proves too far. You think of the queen in her chambers or the king in his great hall, and you wonder, as you often do, whether they feel this same cold, whether their royal blood somehow insulates them, or whether they too spend their winters in a constant negotiation with winter, their comfort purchased not by immunity, but by access to more fires, larger fires, fires that burn longer and hotter than those permitted to lesser souls. The palace where you live, and it is easier to speak of this place in the singular, though the truth encompasses many palaces, many centuries, many kingdoms, exists in a state of permanent compromise between stone and season. It was built, as all medieval and early modern royal residences were built, with defense as its primary concern. The walls are thick, sometimes 12 feet of solid stone, which sounds as if it should provide insulation. And in summer it does, keeping the interior blessedly cool even when the sun beats mercilessly on the outer battlements. But in winter, that same stone becomes a liability. It holds the cold as efficiently as it holds the heat, and once winter settles into those massive walls, it remains there, stubborn and implacable, radiating inward for months. The windows, too, were designed with conquest in mind rather than comfort. They are small, set deep into the stone, and though some have been fitted with glass, expensive, precious glass, greenish and rippled, never quite clear. Many still retain their original wooden shutters, which must be closed against the wind, throwing the chambers into a gloom that lasts from November to March. You have stood at these windows and felt the cold pouring off the glass like water, as if winter itself were a substance that could flow through barriers, finding every microscopic crack and flaw. You have seen frost form on the inside of windows, delicate ferns of ice growing in the pre-dawn hours, beautiful and deeply unwelcome. As you continue down the corridor, you pass a servant carrying an armload of wood. He nods to you, his breath visible in the air between you, and continues on his way. This is one of the constants of palace life in winter, the endless procession of fuel. Wood primarily, but also peat in some regions, and increasingly in the later centuries, coal, though the smoke it produces is acrid and leaves black residue on the fine tapestries, and many nobles resist its use in their private chambers. The quantities required are staggering. A large fireplace in a great hall might consume the equivalent of an entire tree in a single day of heavy burning. Multiply that by the dozens of fireplaces in a substantial palace, multiply it by the months of winter, and you begin to understand why forests were royal possessions, why the right to gather wood was carefully regulated, why accounts and ledgers from these periods are filled with entries about firewood, its procurement, its storage, its distribution. You turn a corner and find yourself in a wider passage, one that leads toward the state apartments. Here the tapestries are richer, the spaces between them smaller. The ceiling is lower too, which helps. Heat rises always, and a 10-foot ceiling holds warmth better than a 30-foot cathedral vault. You can feel the slight difference already, though it is still far from warm. Your breath still mists before you, but perhaps not quite as thickly. The stone underfoot may be a degree less frigid. These small gradations matter. Your body registers them with gratitude, even as your mind knows they are merely the first steps toward real comfort, still distant. Ahead, you see the glow before you feel the warmth. Firelight, spilling from an open doorway, golden and flickering and impossibly welcome. Your pace quickens slightly, though you maintain the dignity appropriate to your station. Even the approach to warmth follows rules here, where every action is observed, where every departure from protocol is noted and remembered. You cannot simply run toward the fire like a child, though your body urges you to do exactly that. You walk steadily, properly, and as you draw closer, the temperature shifts again, more noticeably now. The air begins to feel less like a substance you are moving through, and more like something neutral, something that does not actively drain the heat from your skin. The doorway opens into one of the palace's smaller presence chambers, a room perhaps 30 feet square, with a fireplace large enough that you could stand inside it without stooping. And there is a fire burning there now, a substantial one, split logs arranged in careful architecture so that air flows beneath and between them, feeding the flames, which leap and dance and throw their light across the room in waves. The heat radiating from this source is considerable, and you feel it reach toward you even before you step fully into the chamber. Feel it touch your face first, always the face first, bringing a flush to cold, numb cheeks. There are others here already, arranged in the unconscious geometry that forms around any fire in winter. The warmest positions, directly in front of the hearth, are occupied by those of highest rank. A lady of the court, perhaps, in a gown of deep blue wool with fur at the collar and cuffs, and an elderly gentleman who might be an advisor or a senior member of the household, his hands extended toward the flames in a gesture so familiar it has been captured in 1,000 paintings and tapestries from this era. Further from the fire, the gradations of status and temperature continue. Younger attendants, servants waiting to be summoned, a scribe with a portable writing desk balanced on his knees, trying to keep his ink from freezing while maintaining a respectful distance from his betters. You find your place in this arrangement, guided by invisible but ironclad rules. Not too close, lest you presume. Not too far, lest you freeze. The eternal compromise. And as you settle into your position, as the fire begins its slow work of thawing your outermost layers, you think about the king and queen in their apartments, which you cannot see from here but which you can imagine, having glimpsed them on occasions when duty or favor called you to those inner sanctums. Their chambers are warmed differently. Not more fires, necessarily, though there are certainly multiple hearths, but fires managed with greater care, fed more constantly, built with better wood. The fuel that reaches the royal apartments is selected, seasoned properly for a year or more, split to uniform sizes, and stacked within easy reach, so that fires need never diminish for lack of feeding. The difference between a fire that burns steadily and one that rises and falls with the sporadic addition of fuel is the difference between genuine warmth and a series of hot moments punctuated by returning cold. But even royal fires are not enough, not in the depths of winter, not in buildings designed for war rather than comfort. So there are other strategies, other technologies, accumulated over centuries of trial and adaptation. You have seen many of them, participated in their implementation, felt their effects and their limitations. As you stand here in this presence chamber, grateful for the fire at your face even as you feel the cold still pressing at your back, you think through these various methods, these negotiations with winter that have shaped how royalty has lived for centuries, perhaps for as long as there have been kings and queens enduring seasons in northern climates. The simplest method after fire is insulation of the body rather than the room. The layers you wear now are evidence of this. Linen against the skin, then wool, then more wool, then possibly fur, then an outer layer of wool again. Your clothing is heavy, restrictive, but it traps air between its layers, and that trapped air, warmed by your body, creates a personal climate that travels with you. You have seen portraits of royalty from winter months, and they are always dressed in extraordinary layers, their garments sumptuous but also functional, trimmed and lined with fur. Ermine for the highest ranks, their white pelts studded with black tail tips, but also marten and fox and rabbit, each according to its warmth and its status significance. The queen's winter gowns weigh 20 pounds or more when fully assembled, and that weight is not vanity but necessity, insulation sewn into beauty. But clothing can only do so much. At rest, seated on the cold throne in a cold hall, even layers of fur cannot prevent the gradual leaching of warmth. So there are other devices, portable sources of heat, that can be moved and positioned as needed. You have carried some of these yourself, in service. The foot warmer, for instance, a small wooden box, often beautifully carved and painted, with a metal container inside that holds hot coals or heated stones. This box sits beneath the queen's feet when she sits in state, invisible beneath her skirts, radiating warmth upward. You have prepared these, filling them with coals from the fire, carrying them carefully to avoid spilling, positioning them just so, watching as the queen's expression softens almost imperceptibly as the warmth reaches her. There are hand warmers too, smaller versions of the same principle, metal spheres or boxes that can be held inside a muff or cupped in the palms. Some are quite ingenious, with perforated designs that allow heat to escape while preventing coals from falling out, their surfaces decorated with enamel or engraving, objects of craft as well as comfort. You have held one yourself on occasion, felt its fierce little heat against your cold fingers, understood why even kings would clutch such devices during winter ceremonies that required them to stand or sit for hours in unheated chapels or halls. The fire in front of you shifts, settling as a log burns through and collapses into the glowing bed of coals beneath. Someone, a servant whose job this is, whose entire winter is spent moving from fire to fire, feeding, adjusting, managing these small suns, steps forward with a fresh log, positions it carefully, and steps back. The flames rise again, finding new fuel, and the wave of heat that pulses outward makes everyone in the room unconsciously lean forward, seeking to absorb as much as possible before it dissipates into the vast cold stone surrounding this small sphere of warmth. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the heat on your eyelids, and you think of the great hall, where the king sometimes holds court even in winter, where fires burn in hearths so large that entire pigs can be roasted in them. You think of the screens that are positioned around those hearths, tall wooden panels that help direct the heat outward into the room rather than letting it escape straight up the chimney, that also provide some defense against the intense radiation for those seated too close. You think of the canopy that hangs over the king's throne, heavy fabric that creates a smaller space within the larger room, a tent of trapped warmth that makes his position more bearable. These are the visible technologies of royal warmth, the ones you see and participate in daily. But there are others, subtler, built into the very architecture over time as builders and residents learned from long winters what worked and what did not. The palace you inhabit has evolved, like all long-occupied buildings, through generations of modification. Corridors that once led directly from outer doors to inner chambers have been closed off, and new passages have been created with double or triple doors, creating airlocks where cold gusts lose their force before reaching the inhabited spaces. Walls have been paneled over, not just for beauty but for insulation, the wooden panels creating a warmer surface than bare stone, and the space behind them sometimes packed with rushes or wool or even moss. anything that might create a dead air barrier. Floors that were once bare stone have been covered with rushes in the old style, or increasingly with wooden boards raised slightly, creating an air gap that prevents the direct conduction of cold from the frozen earth below through the stone and into the soles of feet. You have walked through older sections of the palace where these modifications have not yet been made, felt the difference immediately, understood why these changes, though expensive and time-consuming, spread gradually through royal residences across Europe as each generation learned from its cold experience. You open your eyes and the room comes back into focus, the fire still dancing, the other occupants still arranged in their careful hierarchy of warmth. The lady in blue has begun to speak quietly with the elderly gentleman, their conversation too low for you to hear, but their postures are relaxed in a way that would be impossible without the fire's heat, their bodies released from the constant tension of enduring cold. This is one of the hidden effects of winter in these spaces. The way it shapes social life, draws people together around heat sources, creates mandatory communities of warmth. In summer, people disperse through the palace, seeking cool corners, private gardens, breezy corridors. In winter, everyone contracts toward the fires, and in that contraction, conversations happen that might not otherwise occur, alliances form, secrets are shared, simply because cold is a more powerful force than social discomfort, because warmth is worth the price of company. Outside the windows, though you cannot see it from where you stand, you know the winter landscape continues its own existence, indifferent to palaces and fires and the concerns of those who wear crowns. Snow, perhaps, lying deep across the hunting grounds and the formal gardens, transforming everything into a white silence. Or if not snow, then frost, thick and glittering, coating every surface with its crystalline beauty. Or simply the gray cold of a sunless winter day, the sky like stone, the wind like something with teeth. Out there, the peasants in their villages huddle around their own fires, smaller and more precious, their entire homes sometimes consisting of a single room where family and animals shelter together, sharing warmth. Out there, travelers caught between towns pray for shelter before nightfall, knowing that winter darkness without fire is a death sentence. But here, in this presence chamber in this palace, there is warmth, earned and maintained through constant effort, through the labor of dozens of servants, through the wealth that purchases wood and coal, and all the devices of comfort, through the architecture that has been adapted over centuries to make stone livable in winter. And at the center of this palace, in chambers you can imagine but not see from here, the king and queen conduct their winter lives, surrounded by the best warmth that their age can provide, which is still far from perfect, still a matter of careful positioning and constant adjustment, still a daily negotiation with cold that seeps through every wall and waits in every shadow. You breathe slowly, letting the warmth work its way deeper into your body, and you prepare to continue your day, knowing that stepping away from this fire will cost you all the heat you have absorbed, that you will have to cross cold corridors again. That warmth is always temporary, always conditional, always something that must be actively sought and maintained. This is the reality of winter in palaces, the truth behind the grandeur, the daily texture of royal life in an age before central heating made temperature something that could be set and forgotten. The servant adds another log to the fire, and the flames leap higher, and for this moment, at least, there is warmth, there is light, there is the temporary victory of human ingenuity over the patient, implacable cold of winter stone. You stand now in the great hall of a castle that belongs to no single kingdom, but to the collective memory of all northern courts, a composite of stone and tradition that rises from the imagination like morning mist from a frost-locked river. The year matters less than the season, and the season is always winter here, where kings and queens have always sought warmth, where the cold has always been the first and most patient enemy. The hall stretches before you in dimensions that feel both vast and intimate. You can measure its length in the echoes of your footsteps, each one traveling across flagstones worn smooth by centuries of passage, stones that hold the chill of the earth beneath them like a promise they will never break. The ceiling vaults upward into shadows that the firelight cannot quite reach, great timber beams blackened by smoke from generations of fires, each one lit to push back the same darkness, the same cold, the same creeping sense that winter is a siege that never truly lifts. You move closer to the hearth, and the heat finds your face first, then your hands, then begins its slow work of unknotting the tension that cold draws through your shoulders and spine. This fire is not the modest flame of a cottage or the utilitarian burn of a kitchen brazier. This is a fire built for ceremony and survival both. A fire that consumes wood in quantities that would heat a village, logs as thick as a strong man's torso stacked, and burning with a roar that becomes the hall's heartbeat. The fireplace itself is a structure of ambition. You could walk into it without ducking, stand upright within its stone embrace while flames dance around you on three sides. The stones are blackened from decades of use, their mortar dark with soot, and yet they radiate heat with a generosity that speaks to the careful engineering of masons who understood that a king's comfort was also a king's authority. A cold king is a diminished king, and a court that shivers is a court that plots by necessity, drawing close to whatever warmth it can find, including the warmth of conspiracy. You turn slightly and feel the heat press against your left side while your right remains aware of the hall's greater cold, that vast reservoir of winter air that no fire, however grand, can entirely banish. This is the fundamental truth of royal heating, the core paradox around which all strategies revolve. In spaces built to impress, built to contain hundreds of bodies for feasts and ceremonies, built with high ceilings to proclaim power and stone walls to ensure permanence, warmth becomes a problem of physics that even unlimited resources cannot entirely solve. Behind you, set into the walls at intervals, are the smaller fireplaces, the secondary hearths that serve the hall's length. You count 5 of them along one wall, and you know without looking that 5 more mirror them on the opposite side. Each burns with its own modest fire, tended by servants whose sole winter duty is to maintain these perimeter flames, to carry wood and coal in endless succession, to ensure that no hearth goes dark while the court is in session. These fires create corridors of relative warmth through the hall, channels along which courtiers can move without the bone-deep chill that occupies the center of the room like an invisible guest. You walk along one of these corridors now, feeling the heat pulse and fade with each hearth you pass. The rhythm becomes meditative, a reminder that warmth in a medieval castle is never constant but always negotiated, always won through effort and resource and the labor of bodies you will never see. Somewhere below, in cellars and wood stores, servants are even now selecting logs, hauling coal, preparing the next hour's fuel. The warmth you feel is the visible portion of an invisible economy, a river of labor that flows beneath the surface of court life as surely as the castle's foundations rest upon bedrock. The walls themselves tell stories of the battle against cold. You run your hand along stone that has been dressed and fitted with a precision that serves both beauty and function, each block cut to leave minimal gaps where wind might intrude. Between the stones and the hall's interior, however, is another layer, one that catches your eye now as you study the wall more carefully. Tapestries hang from iron rods, their woven surfaces depicting hunting scenes and mythological triumphs, but their true purpose is insulation. The heavy wool and linen create a buffer of trapped air between stone and room, a principle that the castle's builders may not have understood in terms of thermodynamics, but grasped with perfect clarity through observation and necessity. You step closer to one tapestry, close enough to see the individual threads, the way the weaver has built up images of stags and hounds and noble riders through thousands of patient intersections of colored wool. Your breath, still visible in the cooler air near the wall, disturbs the tapestry's edge slightly, and you notice the way it hangs several inches away from the stone, creating exactly the pocket of still air that will slow heat's escape. On particularly bitter nights, additional tapestries will be hung, layered one over another, building up insulation through repetition. The windows are fewer than you might expect in a structure of this size, and each is small, their glass thick and uneven, greenish and bubbled where the glassmaker's art was imperfect. These imperfections diffuse the winter light into something softer than the glare-off snow outside, but they also serve as weak points in the castle's defense against cold. You approach one now and feel the temperature drop with each step, feel the invisible gradient that exists between hearth and glass. The window's shutters are drawn back to admit the pale afternoon light, but you can see the heavy wooden panels that will close over the glass when evening comes, and the cloth curtains that will be drawn over the shutters in turn, another layer in the endless accumulation of barriers against the cold. Between the great fireplaces and the tapestries, between the shutters and the curtains, there exists another element of the hall's heating strategy, one less obvious but no less important. You notice it now in the way certain areas of the floor have been softened, made less harsh than bare stone. Rushes have been strewn across the flagstones, dried grasses and herbs that crunch softly underfoot and release faint scents of summer when compressed by passing weight. The rushes serve many purposes, absorbing spills and muffling sound, But they also create a thin layer of insulation between foot and stone, between body and the earth's deep cold that radiates upward through even the finest masonry. You crouch and run your fingers through the rushes, feeling their brittle dryness, catching the scent of lavender and rosemary that has been mixed among them. In summer, these herbs freshen the air. In winter, they provide aromatherapy against the season's melancholy. But more practically, they mask the smell of smoke that permeates everything in these heated halls. The rushes will be changed regularly, the old ones swept up and replaced with fresh, a cycle of renewal that continues through all the months of cold. Standing again, you become aware of the hall's population, the bodies that move through its warmth and cold zones with practiced efficiency. Servants in plain wool pass along the perimeter, carrying pitchers of hot wine and platters of food from the kitchens. Courtiers in richer dress cluster near the fires, their conversations rising and falling in waves that compete with the flames' roar. A child runs through the center of the hall, heedless of the cold, pursued by a nursemaid whose breath streams behind her like winter pennants. Each body is a small furnace, each contributing its modest heat to the hall's greater warmth. And you understand that the castle's heating strategy has always included its inhabitants as elements of the system, not merely as beneficiaries. Near the largest hearth, a group has gathered in what appears to be informal audience. You move toward them, drawn by curiosity and by the concentration of heat their numbers generate. As you approach, you see that at the center of the group sits a figure of obvious authority, a woman whose posture speaks of sovereignty even before you register the richness of her clothing or the deference shown by those around her. This is a queen in her element, holding court not in the throne room's formal chill but here, where warmth makes conversation possible without the distraction of shivering. She sits in a chair that is itself a marvel of practical luxury. The wood is carved and polished, certainly befitting her status, but the chair's true innovation is visible in the way it has been designed to capture and hold heat. The back is high and curved, creating a shell that deflects drafts and reflects the fire's warmth back toward the occupant. The seat is not bare wood but cushioned with padded velvet, and beneath the visible cushion, you can imagine the layers of wool and linen that provide insulation from below. The arms of the chair are wide enough to rest upon comfortably, and you notice that they are at precisely the right height for the queen to keep her hands near her body, conserving warmth rather than letting her arms extend into the cooler air. More than this, the chair sits upon a raised platform, a dais that elevates the queen perhaps 6 inches above the hall's floor level. This elevation serves ceremony, certainly, marking her status and ensuring she can be seen by those who seek audience, but it also lifts her above the coldest layer of air, the stratum that settles along the floor like invisible snow and resists even the most vigorous fire's attempts to dislodge it. At the queen's feet, you notice, is a small box-like structure, and even from your position several feet away, you can see the warm air shimmering around it. You edge closer, maintaining the respectful distance that court etiquette demands, but near enough now to understand what you are seeing. The box is a foot warmer, an ingenious device that appears in various forms throughout the courts of cold kingdoms. This particular example is crafted from carved wood with pierced designs that allow heat to escape in controlled patterns. Inside, is a metal container holding hot coals or heated stones, elements that were brought glowing from the kitchen fire and will radiate warmth for hours, warming the small space around the queen's feet and, by extension, improving the comfort of her entire body. Cold feet draw heat from the core, you have learned, and warm feet allow the body to relax, to distribute its own warmth more efficiently. Around the queen, others have positioned themselves with similar care, each seeking the optimal balance between proximity to royal presence and proximity to the fire. You observe the subtle negotiations that take place without words, the way a courtier might shift slightly to allow another a better angle to the hearth, the way someone else accepts a cup of hot spiced wine with both hands, grateful for the warmth of the vessel as much as for the drink itself. These are people who have learned to inhabit winter, who have developed strategies both personal and collective for enduring the months when cold is the dominant fact of existence. One of the courtiers wears a garment that catches your attention, and you study it with new understanding. Over his regular clothing, he has donned a heavy robe of fur-lined wool, the kind of indoor outerwear that would seem excessive in a modern heated space, but which here appears not only sensible, but perhaps insufficient. The robe extends to his ankles and is closed with a series of toggles rather than buttons, allowing him to seal himself within its warmth completely or open it to vent excess heat when standing too near a fire. The fur lining is visible at the collar and cuffs, dark and dense, and you recognize it as an assertion both of status and of practical wisdom. Fur remains one of the most efficient insulators known to this age, its structure trapping air in countless tiny pockets, each one a barrier against heat loss. Others wear similar garments, variations on the theme of indoor defensive clothing. You see wool cloaks draped over shoulders, their hoods pushed back, but ready to be raised if the wearer must venture into the hall's colder reaches. You notice gloves tucked into belts, waiting to be donned when handling cold metal door latches, or when moving between buildings across exposed courtyards. You observe the way women's dresses are layered, gown over kirtle over shift, each layer creating insulating air spaces, and the way their sleeves are long and tight at the wrist, preventing warm air from escaping at the cuffs. The queen speaks, and though you cannot hear her words clearly from your position, you observe the way the group leans in, drawn not only by the importance of her speech, but by the opportunity to move incrementally closer to the fire without seeming to abandon proper distance. The fire continues its work behind them, its light painting their faces in warm tones, orange and gold playing against the pale winter light from the windows. Shadows move across the walls in constant animation, the tapestries seeming to come alive as firelight and shadow make their woven figures dance. You turn away from the group and walk deeper into the hall, exploring its length, observing the ways that warmth is created, captured, and conserved throughout this space. You pass a section of wall where another innovation catches your eye. Niches built into the stone at shoulder height, and within several of these niches, candles burn in thick clusters. Each candle is modest in its heat production, certainly, but together they create a noticeable zone of warmth, and their light serves double duty, illuminating the wall's details while contributing their small flames to the hall's greater thermal economy. The candles themselves are of different types, you notice. Some are beeswax, their flames burning clean and bright, releasing a sweet subtle scent that suggests wildflowers and summer sun, a sensory antidote to winter's grip. Others are tallow, less expensive and more common, their flames smokier and their scent less pleasant, but their contribution to warmth no less real. Both types represent significant investment. The beeswax comes from hives that must be maintained through summer, the honey harvested and the wax rendered and purified. The tallow comes from animal fat, a byproduct of the endless slaughter that provisions the castle through winter, fat that might otherwise be eaten, but which here becomes light and heat. You continue walking and find yourself approaching one of the hall's corners, where the geometry of the space creates particular challenges for heating. Cold air settles in corners, you have learned, pooling and resisting circulation. Here, the castle's designers have responded with another hearth, smaller than the main fireplace, but positioned specifically to address this weak point in the thermal envelope. A servant tends this fire now, a young man whose face is flushed from the heat of his work. He uses a long iron poker to adjust the logs, seeking the optimal arrangement for sustained heat rather than dramatic flame. You watch him work, observing the practiced economy of his movements. He does not simply throw wood onto the fire, but considers each log's position, ensuring adequate airflow beneath and between the burning pieces while creating a structure that will burn steadily for hours. This is skilled labor. You realize knowledge passed from one generation of fire tenders to the next, an oral tradition of combustion management that is as essential to royal comfort as any of the more celebrated courtly arts. The servant becomes aware of your presence and steps back deferentially, but you gesture for him to continue his work. He nods and returns to his task, and you stand beside him in the fire's warmth, feeling the immediate physical relief that heat provides, the way your muscles unknot slightly, the way your breathing deepens and slows. For a moment, you close your eyes and simply exist in this pocket of warmth, this small victory over winter, and you understand with your body what you already knew intellectually. That heat is not merely comfort but survival, not merely luxury but necessity, and that every fire burning in this hall represents a chain of labor and resource stretching back through seasons and across landscapes. When you open your eyes, the servant has finished his work and is gathering his tools. He lifts a leather bucket filled with coal, smaller pieces intended to bank the fire later, to extend its life through the night when fresh wood cannot be added as frequently. The coal comes from distant mines, brought to the castle on carts and wagons, another thread in the complex supply web that makes royal warmth possible. Nothing in this system is simple. Everything connects to everything else in networks of dependency and exchange. The servant departs, moving along the hall's edge toward the next hearth that requires his attention, and you remain by the corner fire, using the moment of solitude to observe the hall from this new vantage point. From here, you can see the full length of the space, can trace the zones of warmth and cold that define its geography. Near the great central hearth, warmth dominates, radiating outward in a sphere of relative comfort. Along the walls, where the smaller fires burn, corridors of lesser warmth extend, usable but requiring additional clothing for sustained comfort. Between these zones, in the hall's center, exists a realm of cold air that moves sluggishly, stirred occasionally by the passage of bodies but never truly warm. Above, you notice for the first time, the ceiling shows evidence of heating's consequences. The great beams are black with soot, decades of smoke having stained the wood to ebony. The stone of the vaults has been similarly darkened in patches, particularly above the main hearth where rising smoke has marked its territory. This smoke represents inefficiency, heat escaping upward rather than radiating into the hall, and yet no technology exists in this age to reclaim that lost warmth. The smoke must go somewhere, must be allowed to rise and eventually find its way through vents and gaps to the open air, or else the hall would become uninhabitable, everyone within it overcome by fumes. You see evidence of this necessary ventilation now, studying the ceiling more carefully. High up, near the roofline, there are openings covered with louvered screens, angled to allow smoke to escape while minimizing the entry of rain and snow. These openings cannot be closed entirely, even in the coldest weather, because the fires demand it. They require oxygen to burn and must be allowed to exhaust their smoke. And so the hall can never be fully sealed, can never achieve the airtight efficiency that might maximize warmth. Every fire burning for comfort creates smoke that must be released, and every release point for smoke is also an entry point for cold. This paradox seems central to understanding how kings and queens warmed their rooms in winter. Every solution created new problems. Every strategy for increasing warmth had costs and consequences that had to be managed in turn. The great fires that heated the halls also consumed vast quantities of wood, requiring forests to be managed and harvested, requiring servants to be employed in endless carrying and stacking. The tapestries that insulated walls also trapped smoke and required regular cleaning. The clothing that protected against cold was expensive to produce and maintain, requiring sheep to be raised, wool to be processed, garments to be sewn and repaired. You move away from the corner hearth and walk toward a doorway at the far end of the hall, drawn by curiosity about the spaces beyond, the warren of smaller rooms where the castle's true life unfolds away from ceremonial display. The doorway is hung with a heavy curtain, and when you push through it, you feel the temperature drop immediately, the hall's accumulated warmth left behind as you enter a corridor built for function rather than show. Here, the ceiling is lower, the stone walls closer, the light dimmer. No great hearths warm this space, but as your eyes adjust, you notice braziers positioned at intervals along the corridor, metal bowls on stands containing glowing coals that provide modest heat and navigational light. The braziers are practical devices, portable and relatively safe, able to be moved where warmth is needed most. They cannot heat a space the way a fireplace can, but they create small spheres of warmth that make the corridor passable rather than punishing. You walk slowly down this corridor, feeling the temperature fluctuate, cold near the outer walls where winter presses against stone, warmer near the braziers and warmer still when you pass doorways from which heat escapes from the rooms beyond. Each door is closed, or nearly so, and you understand that this is another element of the heating strategy: compartmentalization. The castle is not heated as a single unit, but as a collection of smaller units, each space given only as much warmth as its function requires, heat husbanded carefully rather than distributed with abandon. At one of the doors, left slightly ajar, you pause and observe the room within. It is a private sitting room where daylight enters through a window larger than those in the main hall, and where a fire burns in a hearth sized for intimacy rather than display. Two women sit near the fire, both engaged in needlework, their fingers moving with steady precision despite the cold that must make such fine work challenging. They are dressed in layers similar to those you observed in the hall, but here, in this smaller space, the effect is more pronounced. You can see the careful construction of their warmth. Wool gowns over linen undergowns, shawls wrapped around shoulders, even caps on their heads despite being indoors, trapping the heat that the body loses most readily through the scalp. Between the women and the fire is a standing screen, a wooden frame across which fabric has been stretched. The screen serves to focus the fire's heat, reflecting it back toward the seated women rather than allowing it to dissipate throughout the room. This is heating as precision tool rather than as blunt force, the application of limited resources to maximum effect. The women sit in the fire's focused warmth, warmer than they would be in the great hall's vastness, despite the smaller fire, because the space has been carefully arranged to concentrate comfort in the areas where bodies actually rest. You move on, not wishing to intrude, and the corridor leads you deeper into the castle's domestic geography. You pass what must be bedchambers, their doors closed tight against the corridor's cold. You pass a stairway leading upward to more private apartments, and another leading downward toward the service areas and, ultimately, the kitchens. The air moving up from below is noticeably warmer, carrying with it scents of cooking, yeast and roasting meat and wood smoke, all signs of the great fires that burn constantly in the castle's heart. You decide to descend, drawn by warmth and curiosity both, and the stairs take you down into a realm where the stone walls feel closer, where the ceiling presses lower, where the architecture speaks of antiquity and pure function. The stairs are worn in the center from centuries of feet, dished out by use until each tread is a shallow bowl. The walls here are unadorned, raw stone showing the marks of the tools that shaped them, and yet they feel warmer than the decorated walls above, and you realize that you are moving deeper into the earth, into the soil's insulation, away from winter's direct assault. At the base of the stairs, the corridor opens into a vestibule, and from here you can see into the kitchen itself, a vast space of organized chaos where the castle's meals are prepared and where, you now understand, much of its heat is generated. The kitchen fires are larger than anything upstairs, great cooking hearths built to roast entire animals, to boil enormous pots of water, to bake dozens of loaves at once in brick ovens whose mouths glow red with sustained heat. The temperature here is almost uncomfortable after the hall's chill, a wall of heat that makes you immediately aware of how cold you had become without fully registering it. Kitchen servants move through this heat with remarkable efficiency, their faces shining with sweat despite the season, their clothing reduced to the minimum that modesty allows. Here, winter's grip is not merely resisted but reversed. The kitchen is a realm of summer preserved through constant labor, its fires never allowed to diminish, its ovens never allowed to cool. You watch as a cook rotates a spit over one of the great hearths, the mechanism turned by a young boy whose job consists of this single repetitive task, hour after hour, ensuring that the meat roasts evenly. The fire beneath the spit is enormous, logs as thick as the boy himself burning with flames that leap and dance. The heat radiating from this single fire would, you calculate, warm a modest room quite comfortably, and yet here it is dedicated entirely to cooking, its warmth a byproduct rather than the primary purpose. But the byproduct is not wasted. You observe now the ways that the kitchen's heat is captured and redistributed. The ceiling above is vaulted, and built into this vault are channels, stone ducts that allow hot air to rise and flow through the walls to spaces above. This is a primitive form of central heating, the convective movement of hot air through the castle's fabric, warming upper floors with heat that would otherwise simply collect uselessly below the kitchen's ceiling. The system is imperfect, certainly, lacking any way to control or direct the heat beyond the basic fact of its rising, but it represents an understanding that waste heat is still heat, still valuable, still worth capturing if engineering allows. Near another hearth, you notice something else, a large cauldron suspended over flames, its contents steaming vigorously. A servant stands beside it, occasionally adding water from a pitcher, maintaining whatever is cooking or preparing inside. But beside this working cauldron is another, and another, each suspended over its own section of the fire. And these, you realize, are not cooking pots but water heaters, vessels whose sole purpose is to maintain supplies of hot water for the castle's use. Hot water, you understand, is yet another weapon against winter's cold. Hot water for washing, for bathing, for warming beds, for mixing into drinks, for countless purposes both hygienic and comfort-related. The water is heated here, in quantity, and then carried throughout the castle in pitchers and buckets, distributed to where it is needed, a liquid form of portable heat. The servants who carry this water are themselves distribution systems, their labor converting the kitchen's concentrated heat into warmth scattered throughout the castle's cold extremities. You step back from the kitchen's overwhelming heat, seeking a balance point, and find yourself in a side room, cooler than the kitchen but warmer than the corridors above. This appears to be a pantry or storage room, its walls lined with shelves holding provisions. And here you notice yet another aspect of the castle's thermal management. Certain foods are stored here specifically because of the temperature, cool enough to preserve them, but not so cold that they freeze, or that their servants cannot work comfortably while accessing them. The castle's internal climate is not uniform but graduated, a spectrum of temperatures each suited to particular purposes. On one shelf, you see rounds of cheese, their rinds dark with age. On another, cured meats hang from hooks, sausages and hams preserved through salt and smoke. These foods are winter's arsenal, provisions laid up during times of plenty to sustain the castle through months when fresh food becomes scarce. But they are also, you realize, stores of summer's warmth, calories preserved, energy captured in edible form, waiting to be released through digestion into the body's internal fire. The human body, you reflect, is itself a furnace, and feeding it is another way of fighting cold. The rich foods of winter, heavy with fat and substance, are fuel as much as nourishment, each meal a delivery of calories that will be burned to maintain core temperature through long cold nights. The queens and kings who feasted in the Great Hall were not merely indulging appetite, but stoking their internal fires, maintaining the biological warmth without which no external heating system, no matter how elaborate, could keep them comfortable. You return to the stairs and begin to climb, carrying with you the kitchen's lingering warmth and a new understanding of the castle's heating as a total system. Not merely fires and tapestries, but food and labor, clothing and architecture, all working together in imperfect but persistent opposition to winter's siege. The stairs seem longer ascending than they did descending, or perhaps you are simply more aware now of the cold you are climbing back into, the hall's relatively warmth notwithstanding. Emerging again into the corridor, you turn not back toward the Great Hall but in another direction, following passages that lead you deeper into the castle's residential areas. Here, you hope to find the private chambers, the intimate spaces where kings and queens slept and worked and lived their most personal hours, and where the battle against cold was fought with different tools and strategies than those employed in public spaces. The corridor narrows and turns, following the logic of the castle's construction rather than any grid, and eventually you arrive at a heavy wooden door, its surface carved with subtle designs, its iron hardware suggesting both security and status. The door is closed but not locked, and when you lift the latch and push it open, you enter a chamber that takes your breath not with cold, but with carefully concentrated warmth. This is a private chamber, clearly, furnished with rich attention to comfort and display both. A bed dominates one wall, a massive piece of furniture raised on a platform and surrounded by heavy curtains that are currently drawn back to reveal layers of coverings, furs and quilts and woven blankets stacked in what appears to be a small mountain of insulation. Near the bed stands a brazier similar to those in the corridor, but more ornate, its metal worked with decorative patterns, its coals glowing steadily, providing both heat and a soft red light that competes with the gray afternoon illumination from a window. The window itself is small and set high in the wall, glazed with thick greenish glass and equipped with shutters that are currently open, but which you can imagine closed and covered with additional hangings on cold nights. Below the window is a bench, a cushioned seat built into the wall's thickness, and you recognize this as a strategic location, a place where one might sit during the day to take advantage of natural light, while still being somewhat protected from the window's radial cold by the bench's thick cushions and the wall's insulating mass. But it is the room's heating that draws your closest attention. In addition to the brazier, there is a small fireplace, not large enough to heat a great hall but perfectly sized for this more intimate space. The fireplace is lit, a modest fire burning with good coals and occasional flame, and before it are arranged two chairs, both equipped with cushions and both positioned to capture the fire's radiant heat. Between the chairs is a small table holding a pitcher and cups, and when you step closer, you can feel the warmth rising from the pitcher, can smell the spices in whatever hot drink it contains. This room represents, you realize, the apex of personal heating strategy in the medieval castle. A small space, easier to warm than a vast hall, multiple heat sources, the fireplace and brazier working together. Careful attention to insulation through tapestries on the walls, rushes on the floor, heavy curtains at window and bed, and the anticipation of the room's use, with hot drinks at hand and seating arranged for optimal comfort. This is a room designed to be lived in during winter, a refuge from the season's harshness, and you can imagine the king or queen spending evening hours here, close to the fire, wrapped in furs, tended by a select few servants, governing or planning or simply existing in what passes, in this age, for comfortable warmth. You sit in one of the chairs, unable to resist the invitation it presents, and immediately understand its design. The back is high and curved, capturing and reflecting heat, just like the Queen's chair in the Great Hall. The seat is deep and cushioned, allowing you to settle fully, and when you lean back, you feel the fire's warmth on your face and hands while the chair's structure protects your back and sides from drafts. For a moment, you simply rest, absorbing heat, and you understand viscerally why the monarchs of cold kingdoms fought so hard to secure wood and coal, to employ armies of servants, to develop and refine these technologies of warmth. Cold is exhausting, warmth permits rest. Cold divides attention, warmth allows focus. Cold is the enemy not merely of comfort, but of effective rule. Rising eventually from the chair, you explore the chamber further, noting details that reveal the completeness of the heating strategy. The bed, when you examine it more closely, is not simply covered with blankets but architected for warmth retention. The mattress rests on ropes strung across the bed frame, creating an insulating air space beneath the sleeper. The mattress itself is thick, stuffed with wool or feathers, another layer of insulation. Upon this foundation are spread multiple blankets and furs, each one trapping heat, each one creating that crucial buffer of still air that prevents warmth from flowing away from the body. But the bed's true innovation is its curtains, heavy fabric panels that can be drawn completely closed, transforming the bed into a room within a room. A microclimate that can be warmed by body heat alone and maintained through the night. You reach out and touch one of the curtains, feeling its weight, its dense weave, and you imagine the experience of sleeping within this enclosed space, the darkness and warmth, the sense of protected intimacy. On the coldest nights, you understand these curtains would be essential, the difference between shivering wakefulness and restful sleep. Near the bed, positioned within easy reach of someone lying down, is a smaller version of the Queen's foot warmer you observed in the Great Hall. This one is more portable, a metal container with a hinged lid, sized to hold heated stones or coals, designed to be placed between the sheets before retiring or to be held against the body for direct warmth. You lift it and feel its weight. Imagine it filled with heat. Imagine the comfort it would bring to cold feet and cold hands. The way it would make the bed's cold sheets bearable until body heat could accumulate within the curtained enclosure. Across the room, you notice a large chest, its lid partially open, and curiosity draws you to examine its contents. Inside are more furs and blankets, winter's reserves, additional layers to be added to the bed when temperatures drop further. There are also what appear to be fur-lined robes and slippers, indoor garments designed for warmth rather than display, the kind of clothing that royalty would wear in private, away from the court's gaze, when comfort mattered more than appearance. Beneath the clothing, wrapped in linen, you find what feels like metal, and when you unwrap it carefully, you discover a long, flat pan with a hinged lid and a long handle, a bed warmer. This device, you understand, would be filled with hot coals and then moved between the bed's sheets before sleeping, preheating the fabric, driving out dampness, transforming the bed from a cold, hostile environment into a warm, welcoming one. The practice of warming the bed is one of those small details that reveals the true nature of winter in an age before central heating. Beds were cold by default, cold as the room they occupied, and had to be actively warmed, treated as small territories to be conquered before they could provide rest. You rewrap the bed warmer and close the chest, then turn to survey the chamber as a whole, understanding it now as a carefully designed system for survival and comfort. Every element serves the central purpose of maintaining warmth. The small size of the room, the multiple heat sources, the heavy textiles, the bed's elaborate construction, the heated drinks and foot warmers and bed warmers and braziers. Nothing is accidental. Everything reflects generations of learning, of trial and error, of accumulated wisdom about how to make winter bearable for those whose status and responsibilities required them to remain active, alert, and capable throughout the cold months. As you stand in this warm chamber, you become aware of time's passage in the way the light has changed, the gray afternoon beginning its slide toward evening, and you know that soon the castle's daily cycle of heating will shift, fires being banked in some areas and built up in others, braziers being moved and refilled, servants beginning their evening rounds with pitchers of hot drinks and extra blankets. The battle against cold is never static, but always adapting, responding to the day's rhythm and the season's demands. You move toward the door, preparing to leave this chamber and continue your exploration, and as your hand touches the iron latch, you pause, taking one more look around this space where a queen or king would have sought refuge from both the season and the burdens of rule. The fire burns steadily in its hearth. The brazier glows with patient heat. The bed stands ready with its layered defenses against cold. And for a moment you feel the weight of what it meant to be royal in winter. To have access to all these comforts and yet still to know cold. Still to need layer upon layer of protection. Still to live in a world where warmth was never guaranteed but always provisional. Always the result of constant effort and endless resource. Stepping back into the corridor, you pull the door closed behind you, sealing the chamber's warmth within. And you continue your journey through this castle of memory and fact, seeking to understand more fully how the powerful warmed themselves when winter came and cold laid siege to stone and flesh alike. You stand now in the heart of winter, in the center of a palace that has learned, over centuries, to hold warmth as a miser holds gold. The great hall behind you fades into memory as you move deeper into the private quarters, where the true battle against cold is waged not with grandeur, but with intimate, deliberate care. Here, in these inner rooms, you begin to understand that keeping warm was never a single act but a layered philosophy, a series of concentric defenses built between the body and the merciless air beyond the walls. The chamber you enter now belongs to a queen whose name has been worn smooth by time, but whose rooms remain vivid in the historical record through inventories and accounts. It is late afternoon in the depths of January, and the light that filters through the windows, small, precious openings fitted with oiled linen rather than glass, carries no heat, only a pale illumination that makes the shadows deeper by contrast. You can see your breath here, even now, even with the fire burning steadily in the hearth that dominates the eastern wall. The stone floor beneath your feet radiates cold upward through the layers of rushes and woven mats, through the carpets brought at great expense from the east, through the very soles of your soft leather shoes. Cold, you are learning, is patient. It finds every gap, every stillness, every moment of inattention. But so too is warmth, when it is tended properly. You watch as a servant, a woman whose face you almost recognize, whose presence feels both particular and universal, moves through the chamber with the practiced efficiency of ritual. She carries a long brass rod with a flattened end, and with this she adjusts the logs in the fireplace, not disturbing the structure of the burn but optimizing it, creating channels for air that make the flames draw upward more eagerly. The wood she uses has been selected with care. Oak for its long, steady burn, split and stacked and dried for 2 full years in covered sheds where air could move through it freely. Green wood, damp wood, would hiss and smoke and steel heat up the chimney rather than releasing it into the room. Every log represents foresight, planning, the labor of foresters and carters and the men who split timber in the autumn sun, knowing that their work would bear fruit in a season they could scarcely imagine during the warmth of September. You move closer to the fire, and immediately you feel the asymmetry of warmth that characterized these centuries. Your front grows hot, almost uncomfortably so, while your back remains cool, exposed to the general chill of the chamber. This is the geometry of radiant heat, the ancient contract between flame and flesh. To be warmed by a fire is to be warmed incompletely, in sections, in degrees. You turn slowly, like meat on a spit, offering each side of yourself to the flames in turn. And as you do, you notice what the queen herself would have noticed. The tapestries that line the walls, not merely for decoration but as thick barriers against the drafts that seep through stone. These textile walls create a room within a room, trapping a layer of still air between fabric and stone, and that stillness is itself a form of warmth, or at least a reduction of cold's invasion. The tapestries here depict a hunt in an eternal summer, figures on horseback pursuing deer through forests where leaves never fall. There is something both comforting and melancholic in this, you think, to be surrounded by images of warmth while fighting constantly against cold's dominion. But perhaps that is precisely the point. The mind, too, needs warming. The eye needs something other than gray stone and the flicker of flame. These woven scenes, worked by hands in distant workshops, brought here at expense that would feed a village for a season, serve a purpose beyond beauty. They remind those who dwell here that winter is not eternal, that the world beyond these walls contains green and gold, heat and plenty. They are tapestries of hope as much as tapestries of thread. You notice now a detail you had missed. Beneath the tapestries, the walls are lined with wooden paneling, oak planks fitted together with the precision of fine joinery. This too is insulation, another layer between cold stone and warm air. The wood itself seems to hold a memory of warmth, a gentler surface than stone, one that does not drink heat quite so greedily. running your hand along it. And you do, drawn by some impulse toward tactile understanding. You find it cool but not cold, smooth and slightly waxy from years of treatment with beeswax and oils. The panels are carved with simple designs, linen fold patterns that catch the firelight and create ever-shifting shadows. Beauty and function merge here so completely that it becomes difficult to say where one ends and the other begins. The servant has moved to the windows now, and you watch as she draws heavy curtains across them, thick wool dyed deep blue, lined with linen. The little light that remained is reduced further, but immediately you feel the difference. The drafts that whispered constantly around the window frames, too subtle to hear but felt as a persistent cooling, diminish. The curtains balloon slightly, moved by air currents you cannot see, then settle into place. Night is coming, and with it the deepest cold, the hours when even the great fires struggle to maintain their territory against the dark. These curtains will stay closed until morning, when light becomes more valuable than the small warmth they preserve by blocking the frozen glass beyond. But glass itself, you are learning, was a luxury that transformed the winter experience of those who could afford it. In earlier centuries, in simpler dwellings, windows were sealed with oiled cloth, with animal membranes, with shutters that blocked wind but also light, forcing a choice between illumination and preservation of heat. Glass, thick, uneven, greenish glass full of bubbles and ripples, allowed light to enter while keeping the worst of the wind at bay. It was expensive, so expensive that in some noble houses the glass windows were removed when the family traveled, packed carefully and taken along to the next residence rather than left behind. To have glass in your windows in winter was to display wealth as surely as wearing ermine, and the soft, dim light it admitted, robbed of brightness by its imperfections, nonetheless felt precious, a gift that shuttered darkness would deny. You turn from the window and take in the room as a complete system of warmth-keeping. Near the fire, a cluster of chairs has been arranged, high-backed chairs with wings that curve forward, designed to trap heat and block drafts. These chairs create microclimates of comfort, small zones where a body can sit and feel genuinely warm rather than merely less cold. The seats are cushioned with pads stuffed with wool or down, and you imagine settling into one, feeling the cushion conform to your weight, the chair's wings sheltering your head and shoulders, the fire's heat gathering in the space between your body and the wood. To sit thus was not merely to rest, but to inhabit a carefully engineered environment, each element serving the central purpose of maintaining human comfort in conditions that, without intervention, would be merely endurable at best. On a small table beside one of these chairs, you notice a curious object, a pomander, a sphere of pierced silver containing aromatic substances. You lift it, it is pleasantly heavy, warm from sitting near the fire, and bring it close to your face. The scent that emerges through the decorative holes is complex. Cloves, cinnamon, dried roses, something sharp that might be citrus peel preserved in spices. In an age when bathing was infrequent, when clothes were worn for long periods without washing, when rooms were sealed against drafts and filled with the smoke of fires and candles and the breath of many people, such scents served a practical purpose. But there was more to it than masking unpleasant odors. These spices were expensive, imported, associated with warmth both literal and metaphorical. The warmth of distant lands where such things grew, the warmth of the complex trade routes that brought them north. To hold a pomander filled with such substances was to hold a piece of the world's warmth, concentrated and portable. The door opens, admitting a draft and another servant, this one carrying an object you recognize from countless period descriptions, but have never quite visualized properly until now. A bed warmer, a brass pan on a long handle filled with hot coals. You watch as she moves to the great bed that dominates the far end of the chamber, that massive piece of furniture that is less a bed than a room unto itself. She pulls back the heavy curtains that surround it. These are even thicker than the window curtains, deep red wool lined with quilted linen, and slides the warming pan between the sheets, moving it methodically back and forth, up and down the length of the mattress. You can almost feel it yourself, the transformation of that bed from a cold expanse of linen into something approaching welcome. The sheets warmed to body temperature or near it, the chill driven out of the feather mattress, the blankets above losing their clammy coolness. This bed is itself a triumph of medieval and early modern engineering against cold. It stands high off the floor, lifted away from the worst of the chill that settles low in any room. Its frame is solid oak, carved and substantial, and from this frame hang the curtains that create a small, enclosed space. When those curtains are drawn at night, when the person within lies beneath layers of wool blankets, linen sheets, furs, and quilted coverlets. The bed becomes a microclimate, warmed by body heat and insulated by fabric. The breath of the sleeper, the subtle warmth of exhalation, stays trapped within rather than dissipating into the larger room. To sleep in such a bed was to sleep in a warm darkness, cocooned and protected, while the fires in the outer chamber died down to coals and the cold crept back across the floors and up the walls. You think of the vast difference this made, night after night, season after season. While common people slept on thin pallets on cold floors, perhaps with a single rough blanket, often huddled together for warmth. Children, parents, sometimes even animals brought inside against the worst weather. Those with wealth and status slept in these elaborate constructions, these fortresses against cold. The health implications alone were significant. Cold weakened the body, made it susceptible to the diseases that ravaged medieval and early modern populations. To sleep warm was to sleep safer, to wake more rested, to maintain strength through the lean months when food was less plentiful and bodies needed every advantage. The servant finishes with the bed warmer and carries it away, and in her absence you step closer to examine the bed itself. The mattress, you know from your reading, would have been stuffed with feathers, goose down for the very wealthy, mixed feathers for those of more modest means. Beneath this feather mattress might be another, stuffed with wool or even straw, creating layers of insulation between the sleeper and the wooden bed frame. The sheets are linen, fine linen, woven smooth and soft, and over these lie blankets of wool. Not the scratchy, rough wool of common use, but wool that has been fulled and napped, carded and finished until it achieves a softness approaching luxury. Atop these blankets, a coverlet of quilted silk, the stitching creating patterns of flowers and vines, and beneath this decorative layer, true warmth, fur. Not decorative fur, not the ermine and sable of ceremonial robes, but practical furs, fox, rabbit, squirrel, sewn together into warm throws that trap heat with an efficiency that plant fibers cannot match. You run your hand over the coverlet, feeling the slight give of the padding within, the coolness of the silk that will warm quickly once beneath body weight. This bed represents hundreds of hours of labor. The raising of the geese, the collection of their down, the shearing of sheep and the processing of their wool, the cultivation of flax and its transformation into linen thread, the weaving, the sewing, the embroidery. It represents trade networks stretching across Europe and beyond, bringing silk from the east, furs from the north. It represents, too, an understanding of heat and insulation that was sophisticated even if not couched in modern scientific terms. Those who made these beds knew, through experience and inherited knowledge, what worked to keep a body warm through a winter night. Moving away from the bed, you notice another source of warmth, one more subtle but no less important: braziers, small metal vessels filled with hot coals, placed strategically around the room. These are not for cooking but purely for heat, and they are tended carefully, for they represent both comfort and danger. The coals within them glow red-orange, and near them the air shimmers with rising heat. They are placed on tiles or stone slabs, never directly on wood or carpet, and they are watched constantly, for the risk of fire in these rooms of timber and fabric was ever present. Yet the warmth they provide is different from the fireplace, more distributed, more even, without the harsh intensity of open flame. You stand near one and feel heat rising around you, gentler than the fireplace, more enveloping. The metal of the brazier itself becomes warm to the touch, radiating heat in all directions. Some of these braziers are remarkably beautiful objects, wrought brass or bronze, pierced with decorative patterns that allow air to feed the coals and light to escape in scattered points. They serve as sculpture and as heat source simultaneously, and you think how often, in this era, beauty and function were inseparable, how the same object served aesthetic and practical purposes without conflict. There is something in this integration that feels lost in later ages, where function becomes pure efficiency and beauty becomes pure decoration, the two divorced and living separate lives. You hear footsteps in the corridor beyond the chamber, the sound muffled by distance and the thick tapestries, and shortly another figure enters. A chamberlain, perhaps, or a high-ranking servant, someone whose bearing suggests authority. He carries a ledger, and he moves through the room checking details. The level of wood stacked beside the fireplace, the trimming of candles, the position of the fire screen. This too is part of the system of warmth. Constant attention, constant small adjustments, the vigilance required to maintain comfort in an environment that constantly threatens to slip back into cold. Keeping warm was not a state achieved and then forgotten, but a process, ongoing, requiring labor and fuel and attention. The fuel itself represents a significant portion of a royal household's winter concerns. The amount of wood required to heat even a portion of a palace through a winter is staggering. In some English royal households, records show hundreds of cartloads of wood brought in before winter, along with coal in later periods, peat in some regions, even dried animal dung in areas where wood was scarce. The logistics of this, the cutting, the transporting, the storing, the distribution to various hearths and stoves throughout the buildings, required careful management. Some castles and palaces maintained their own forests, managed for timber, with trees marked years in advance for cutting. The provision of fuel was a major concern of estate management, and shortages could have serious consequences, not merely for comfort, but for health and even survival during the harshest winters. You watch as the chamberlain makes notes in his ledger, tallying something you cannot quite see, then nods to himself and departs. The room settles back into its particular stillness, the crackling of the fire, the occasional pop of sap igniting, the subtle sound of fabric moving in drafts too gentle to feel, but present nonetheless. You realize that you have grown warmer standing here, that your body has adjusted to the room's temperature, finding equilibrium. This is the nature of acclimatization. You think, the way that what feels cold at first becomes tolerable, then normal, then comfortable. Medieval and early modern people, wearing their layers, living in their relatively cool rooms, likely felt comfortable at temperatures that would seem frigid to modern sensibilities. The body adapts, within limits, and what seems inadequate from a centrally heated perspective might have felt sufficient, even pleasant, to those who knew no alternative. Yet you know from the records that illness stalked these halls in winter, that cold-related ailments were common, that even in royal chambers people suffered from what they called chills and agues, from respiratory ailments that worsened in the damp cold, from the simple wearing down of bodily reserves that inadequate warmth produces over weeks and months. Children, the elderly, those already weakened by disease, these were most vulnerable, and even wealth could not always protect them. The fireplaces and braziers, the furs and heated beds, reduced risk but did not eliminate it. Winter remained dangerous, a testing time, and survival through to spring was never quite guaranteed for the frail. You move now toward another feature of the room you have not yet examined closely. A small side chamber, a garderobe, what in later eras would be called a water closet, but which here serves also as a storage space for clothing. The name itself, garderobe, the guarding of robes, speaks to function. You step into this smaller space and immediately understand another of its purposes. It is noticeably warmer here. The chamber is small, enclosed, and it shares a wall with the main fireplace flue. The stone of that wall radiates warmth into this small space, and the clothes hanging here, heavy robes, woolen gowns, fur-lined cloaks, benefit from this gentle heat. Damp clothing, brought in from outdoors, would dry here. Cold fabric would warm. To dress in the morning was to don garments that had been warmed overnight by proximity to the flue. A small comfort, but a significant one when everything else is cold. The garderobe has another function, less pleasant but worth noting. The privy shaft that descends through the wall to a pit below, or, in some castles, to the outside air or a moat. This was a genuine amenity, eliminating the need for chamber pots, but it also represented a significant source of drafts. The shaft, open at top and bottom, allowed air to flow upward, cold air in winter, and this required careful management. Sometimes cloths or boards placed to block the opening when not in use. Yet even here, even in this detail, you see the constant negotiation between comfort and practicality, the adjustments and compromises that characterized life in this era. Returning to the main chamber, you find yourself thinking about the layers people wore. For clothing was perhaps the most important defense against cold, more intimate and constant than any fire. You picture the queen dressing, or being dressed, in the morning. First the linen shift, the chemise that lay against the skin, changed regularly, washed regularly, the layer that absorbed sweat and oils and kept the more expensive outer garments cleaner. Over this, a gown of wool, perhaps lined with linen or silk, long-sleeved, high-necked, the fabric thick and tightly woven. Over this, another gown, sleeveless or with wide sleeves that revealed the undergown, this outer layer even heavier, perhaps trimmed with fur at the neck and hem. A girdle at the waist, not for fashion alone, but to create a slight blousing of fabric that trapped warm air. Stockings of wool held up with garters. Soft shoes or slippers for indoor wear, the leather flexible, The soles relatively thin since she would not be walking on frozen ground, but on carpeted floors. And then, for moving through the colder parts of the palace, or for sitting in the great hall where the fires cannot reach all corners, a cloak or mantle, this perhaps lined with fur, rabbit, fox, even ermine for state occasions. The weight of these garments was considerable, and you imagine how that weight itself became comforting, a constant gentle pressure, the fabric forming a barrier that moved with the body, trapped the body's heat, created a personal environment that traveled wherever its wearer went. To be dressed properly for winter was to be armored against cold, layer upon layer, each with its purpose. Men's clothing followed similar principles. The linen shirt, the doublet, the jerkin or jacket, the hose, the cloak. Wealthy men might wear velvet, heavy silk, wool so fine it felt like a softer substance entirely. They might line their garments with fur, might wear gloves of supple leather lined with wool or fur. The head, too, required covering, for much heat is lost through an unprotected head. Caps and hats of wool, of velvet, of fur, worn indoors and out. Only in the warmest rooms might these be removed, and you notice now, looking around this chamber, hooks and stands for such garments, places where hats and cloaks could rest near the fire, warming for their next use. The afternoon has deepened toward evening while you've been exploring this chamber, and you notice that the light through the curtained windows has faded to almost nothing. A servant enters, a different one now, or perhaps the same one returned. They begin to blur together, these quiet, efficient figures who maintain the systems of comfort, and begins lighting candles. These are not tallow candles, smelly and smoky, but beeswax, expensive, burning with a cleaner flame and a faint honey scent. The candlesticks are numerous, placed on tables, on mantelpieces, on stands, and as each is lit the room transforms. The shadows retreat differently now, moved by multiple points of light rather than by the single source of the fire. The room becomes warmer in appearance, if not in fact, the golden light of candles suggesting heat, even as they provide relatively little of it. Yet they do provide some warmth, you realize. A dozen candles burning in a closed room produce a measurable amount of heat. Not enough to warm the space alone, but enough to contribute, enough to take a small edge off the cold. And the light itself serves a warming function for the mind. Darkness and cold are allied in human perception, and to push back one is to seem to push back the other. The room feels more inhabitable now, more human, more defended against the night that is settling over the landscape beyond these walls. You imagine that landscape now, the snow-covered fields, the frozen streams, the bare trees dark against the sky. You imagine the small villages clustered around the palace, the peasant cottages with their central hearths, their thatched roofs, their shuttered windows. You imagine the smoke rising from each dwelling, gray against the darkening blue, each trail of smoke representing a family huddled close to their fire, burning what fuel they have managed to gather, hoping it will last until spring. The contrast between their experience and the experience in this chamber is vast, yet the principles remain the same. Fire, insulation, layers, the husbanding of warmth against the patient siege of cold. A bell rings somewhere distant in the palace, marking the hour, calling people to supper. The queen, you imagine, will leave this chamber soon, wrapping herself in her furs, proceeding through corridors where servants have lit braziers at intervals, where tapestries line the walls, where the cold is held at bay by constant effort and expense. She will sit at table in the great hall, where the fires roar and the body heat of many people creates an almost stifling warmth near the high table, though the far corners remain cold. She will eat food that has been cooked over fire, will drink wine that has perhaps been warmed with a hot poker, will feel the internal warmth that food provides, the way the body generates its own heat from fuel both external and internal. But that is still to come. For now, you remain in this chamber, feeling the interplay of warmth and cold, light and shadow, the way each element balances against others. You understand now that keeping warm in these centuries was not a single act but a comprehensive lifestyle, a set of practices and technologies and social arrangements all oriented toward a single goal: maintaining human life and comfort in conditions that were, without intervention, hostile to both. Every object in this room, every arrangement of furniture, every choice of fabric and placement of fire, represents accumulated knowledge, trial and error over generations, solutions developed and refined and passed down. You think about the progression of the day in such a place. Morning would come cold, the fires reduced to ashes or coals that must be rebuilt, the room's warmth dissipated in the night hours despite the closed curtains and the bed's cocoon. Servants would rise first, in their own cold quarters, would relight fires throughout the palace before the nobility woke. By the time the queen emerged from her curtained bed, the room would be warming again, the worst of the chill driven back. Through the day, the fires would be maintained, tended, never allowed to die completely, for relighting was laborious and the loss of warmth significant. Wood would be brought in periodically, the logs arranged, the ashes cleaned out before they smothered the flames. Evening, as now, would bring the lighting of candles, the drawing of curtains, the preparation of the bed with warming pans. Night would bring the retirement to that curtained sanctuary, the extinguishing of most candles for safety, the banking of fires so they would burn slowly through the night. And then morning again, the cycle repeating, day after day, through the long months from November to March, sometimes longer in harsh years, shorter in mild ones, but always this constant attention, this daily and hourly practice of warmth-keeping. You move once more through the chamber, touching objects lightly, feeling the temperature differences, the warmth of wood near the fire, the coolness of metal away from it, the neutral temperature of fabric that has hung undisturbed. You notice details you missed before. A screen covered in leather panels painted with scenes of summer gardens, positioned to block drafts from the door while allowing passage around it. A footstool placed near the fire, its top covered in needlework, its purpose to lift feet away from the cold floor into the warmer air that rises from the hearth. A small table on which sits a book, bound in leather, its pages of vellum or expensive paper, and you realize that even reading, even this quiet pleasure, was affected by cold. Ink froze in severe temperatures, fingers grew too numb to turn pages, light was limited by the expense of candles. Winter curtailed activities, drew people close to fires, made the world smaller and more interior. Yet there is something appealing in this enforced coziness, you think. Something that the modern world, with its central heating and its climate control, has perhaps lost. The awareness of warmth as something precious, something to be gathered close and shared. The consciousness of fire as a living presence, requiring care, providing in return not just heat but light, sound, motion, a focal point for attention and gathering. The understanding that comfort is achieved through effort, that ease is the result of constant small attentions, that nothing is automatic or guaranteed. You settle into one of the wingback chairs near the fire, and immediately you feel the rightness of its design. The way it embraces you, focuses the warmth, blocks the drafts you were not fully aware of until they ceased. The cushion beneath you is soft, yielding, and you let yourself sink into it slightly, feeling your body relax. The fire pops, sending up a small shower of sparks that die before reaching the chimney's throat. The candles flicker in some current of air too subtle to name. The room breathes around you, alive with small sounds and movements, and you understand that you could sit here for hours, as people did sit, watching the flames, letting thoughts drift, perhaps working at some handcraft, embroidery, tablet weaving, the carving of a small object, perhaps simply sitting, resting, conserving energy through the dark months. This, you realize, is the truth beneath the historical facts, beneath the inventories of wood and the descriptions of fireplaces and the details of clothing. Warmth was not merely physical but psychological, social, spiritual. It was gathering places and shared spaces, firelight and candlelight creating circles of safety in the darkness. It was the rhythms of the day shaped by light and warmth's availability. It was seasons deeply felt, winter truly winter, its hardships real, its ending genuinely celebrated. It was vulnerability acknowledged and defended against, the thin line between comfort and suffering made visible by cold's constant pressure. Kings and queens warmed their rooms with fires built by others, with tapestries woven by hands they never saw, with furs taken from animals trapped by men and women of the forests, with technologies developed over centuries. But they also warmed them with the same fundamental principles that warmed the poorest cottage. Fire, air, insulation, layers, vigilance. The scale differed, the quality of materials differed, the number of servants attending to comfort differed, but the reality remained the same. Cold cared nothing for rank or wealth. It tested everyone, and everyone, from the highest to the lowest, had to answer that test with the same essential tools, refined and elaborated perhaps, but at their core unchanged since humans first learned to harness fire and shelter. The chamber has grown quieter now, as if settling into evening's rhythms. The servant has finished her tasks and departed. You are alone with the fire and the candles and the silent tapestries and the great bed waiting with its warmed sheets. You remain in your chair, watching the flames, feeling the warmth on your face and hands, feeling the cooler air at your back, understanding in your body what you have learned in your mind. This is how it was. This is what it meant. This is the reality beneath the romantic images of medieval and Renaissance life. Not misery, not quite, but not easy comfort either. Something between, something that required constant effort and attention, something that makes you appreciate both their ingenuity and your own age's casual abundance of warmth. You stand now in the deep heart of winter, in a place where memory and present moment blend like snow melting into dark water. The stone walls around you seem to hold not just the cold of this particular January night, but all the winters that have ever pressed against these ancient foundations. You have walked through corridors where Elizabeth once paced, through chambers where Henry's breath clouded the air, through halls where unnamed kings before them sought comfort against the season's cruelty. And now you find yourself in a moment of perfect stillness, a pause between the inhalation of history and its slow exhalation into the present, where understanding deepens like frost patterns on glass, intricate and inevitable. The fire in the chamber before you burns with the accumulated knowledge of centuries. You can see in its flames not just wood transforming into light and heat, but the careful architecture of warmth that required the labor of dozens, the planning of chamberlains, the foresight of stewards who understood that a king's comfort in winter was not luxury but necessity, not indulgence but the maintenance of power itself. Because a cold king was a distracted king, and a distracted king was a vulnerable one. The warmth you feel now, standing close enough to sense the heat on your face and hands, represents an entire economy of survival, a complex web of human effort that stretched from the woodcutter in distant forests to the groom of the stool who tended the royal bedchamber. You move closer still, and the heat intensifies, almost uncomfortable in its directness. This is the warmth they craved, these monarchs of the north, these rulers of cold stone kingdoms. This immediate, undeniable presence of fire that could, for a few hours, banish the winter from awareness, could make the body forget the season pressing against every window, every door, every gap in mortar and stone. But you know now, having traveled this far into understanding, that the fire alone was never enough. The fire was the heart, yes, but warmth required a body, required layers and systems and the constant attention of human hands. In the corner of this chamber, you notice a figure you had not seen before, or perhaps had not allowed yourself to fully see. An old woman, her face creased with decades of service, sits on a low stool near a cabinet filled with linens. Her hands move with automatic grace, folding and refolding, checking and smoothing, preparing the layers that will warm the royal bed tonight. She does not look at you, but you sense she knows you are watching. Her presence here is so natural, so much a part of the room itself, that she might be a ghost or might be the most solid thing in this chamber, more real than the tapestries, more permanent than the throne itself. You want to speak to her, to ask her questions, but something in her quiet concentration stops you. Instead, you simply watch, and in watching, you begin to understand things that no chronicle ever recorded, no household account ever captured. You see how she tests the weight of each blanket, judging by touch alone whether it has absorbed too much moisture from the winter air. You see how she places the warming pans in a particular order, knowing from long experience which metals hold heat longest, which designs distribute warmth most evenly. You see how she positions the bed curtains so they will trap warmth without creating dangerous proximity to any candle or lamp. This is the knowledge that kept kings alive through winters that killed commoners by the hundreds. This quiet expertise, passed from one chambermaid to another, from mother to daughter sometimes, from experienced servant to careful apprentice. The written records speak of quantities, how many cords of wood, how many yards of velvet, how many pounds of beeswax. But they do not speak of this, of the judgment that could be learned only through years of attention, through winters survived and lessons absorbed in cold rooms and warm. The woman finally looks up, and her eyes meet yours. They are not unkind, but they carry in them a weight of knowing that makes you feel suddenly young, suddenly ignorant of things you thought you understood. She does not smile, but something in her expression softens, and she gestures to a chair near the fire, inviting you to sit, to stay, to witness what she has witnessed through decades of service in these cold halls. You accept her invitation, settling into the chair, feeling its carved arms smooth under your palms, worn by the hands of others who sat here before you, watching fires burn, feeling winter press against the stones, seeking the comfort that only warmth could bring. And as you sit, the woman begins to speak, her voice low and steady, a counterpoint to the fire's crackle and hiss. She tells you of a winter early in her service, when she was young and thought she understood the requirements of her position. It was the winter of a great frost, when the Thames itself froze solid and the cold penetrated even the best heated chambers. She had prepared the king's bedchamber as she had been taught, had done everything according to the methods she had learned. But in the deep night a message came. The king could not sleep. The cold had found him even beneath his furred blankets, even behind his heavy curtains. She was summoned, and she went in fear, expecting rebuke, expecting punishment for her failure. But the old chamberlain who met her at the door did not scold. Instead, he took her through the chamber, showing her things she had not thought to check. A gap where the window frame had shrunk in the cold, allowing a draft to knife through the room's carefully constructed warmth. A section of wall tapestry that had been allowed to hang too far from the stone, creating a channel where cold air could flow downward like an invisible river. The brazier positioned just slightly wrong, so its heat rose to the ceiling rather than spreading through the space where the king actually lay. She learned that night, she tells you, that warming a royal chamber in true winter was not a matter of following instructions, but of understanding cold itself, of developing a sense for how it moved and pooled, how it found entry through the smallest gaps, how it defeated strategies that seemed perfect but lacked some crucial element of positioning or timing or material choice. She learned that the preparation of warmth was a form of combat, and winter was an enemy that never tired, never retreated, never conceded defeat, but only withdrew temporarily before returning, relentless and patient. You listen to her words, and they settle into you like warmth itself, changing your understanding from something abstract to something felt. The fires you have seen throughout this long exploration were not mere blazes of wood transformed into light and heat. They were defensive measures, bulwarks against an enemy that could kill as surely as any sword, as certainly as any poison. The monarchs who invested such resources in their comfort were not indulging in luxury, but ensuring their survival. And with it, the survival of the state itself, because a dead king in winter meant succession crisis, meant potential civil war, meant chaos that could tear a kingdom apart. The woman rises now, returning to her tasks, and you watch as she completes the chamber's preparation. She places the final warming pan beneath the covers, checking its temperature with a practiced touch that tells her exactly how long its heat will last. She adjusts a screen to better deflect warmth toward the bed. She positions a pitcher of wine near enough to the fire that it will stay drinkable through the night, but not so near that it will grow too warm. Each action is small, but together they create a system of comfort that represents the pinnacle of medieval technology, the highest achievement of practical knowledge in an age that would not see central heating for centuries yet to come. When she finishes, she turns to you once more, and now she does smile, a small expression that transforms her face, making visible the young woman she once was decades ago when she first learned these skills. She tells you that warmth, in the end, is not about fire alone, is not about blankets or braziers or any single element. Warmth is about attention, about care, about the willingness to think about another person's comfort and to work, hour after hour, day after day, to maintain it against the winter's siege. Then she is gone, not through any door you can see, but simply absent, and you are alone again in the chamber, with only the fire for company. But the room feels different now, feels inhabited by all the servants who performed these tasks through all the winters of this castle's existence. Feels warmed not just by flame, but by the accumulated care of generations. You rise and move to the window, looking out into the night. Snow falls steadily, visible in the light that spills from the chamber behind you. You can see your breath cloud the cold glass, can feel the chill radiating from the window despite the fire's warmth at your back. This is the reality they lived with, these kings and queens, this constant presence of cold, this unending battle to keep it at bay. Even in their best heated chambers, even surrounded by every comfort their age could provide, winter was always there, always pressing close, always seeking entry. But as you stand there, you become aware of something else, something that has been present throughout this journey, but which you are only now able to articulate. The warmth these monarchs sought was not just physical. Yes, they needed heat to survive the season, needed fires and furs and heated stones to keep their bodies functional through months of cold. But they needed something more as well, something that all the braziers and blankets could not fully provide. They needed the warmth of human presence, of voices and music, of gatherings that filled cold halls with breath and body heat, and the particular energy that only human companionship can generate. This is why the Christmas feasts were so elaborate, why the 12 days of celebration filled the calendar in the darkest part of winter. Not just because the agricultural calendar allowed for rest and festivity, but because gathering together was itself a strategy against the cold, a way of generating warmth that transcended the merely physical. You turn from the window and look again at the chamber, seeing it now with this new understanding. The arrangement of furniture is designed not just for efficiency, but for social warmth. The chairs are positioned to encourage conversation, close enough that people sitting in them could speak without raising their voices, could share the warmth of their presence, as well as the warmth of the fire. The table is sized for intimate gatherings, for games of chess or cards, for the kind of prolonged social interaction that made winter nights pass more quickly. In the great halls where you began this journey, you saw the same principle at work on a larger scale. The long tables, the arrangements that brought hundreds of bodies into a single space, the traditions of communal eating and drinking and entertainment. These were not just cultural practices, but survival strategies, ways of fighting winter that work through collective body heat and collective spirit, through the warmth that human beings generate simply by being together, by sharing space and breath and attention. You think of the descriptions you have read of medieval Christmas celebrations, of the games and disguisings, the music and dancing, the plays and revelries that filled the cold halls from dusk till dawn. These were not frivolous entertainments, but necessary antidotes to the isolation and darkness that winter imposed. They were the court's way of generating light and warmth from within, of creating through human effort and creativity a season of brightness in the midst of cold and dark. And you understand now why the cessation of winter was celebrated with such intensity, why the return of spring was marked with festivals and ceremonies that acknowledged the season's arrival as a kind of redemption. They had survived. They had made it through another winter, had kept themselves alive through months when the cold tried daily to kill them. The warmth of spring was not just pleasant but miraculous, not just welcome but proof of their endurance, their resourcefulness, their refusal to surrender to the season's siege. You move through the chamber now, touching objects, the carved bed frame, the smooth stone of the fireplace surround, the heavy fabric of the curtains. Each object carries in it the memory of cold, the echo of winter's past, the presence of all those who sought warmth in this very room. And you feel, perhaps for the first time fully, the privilege of your own age, your own time, when warmth is something controlled by a thermostat, when winter is an inconvenience rather than a threat, when the cold outside remains outside unless you choose to encounter it. But you feel something else as well, a recognition that perhaps something has been lost in this easy warmth, this effortless climate control. The people who lived in these cold castles, who fought daily to stay warm, who understood winter as an enemy to be respected and resisted. They knew something about resilience, about the value of comfort, about the preciousness of warmth that you have never had to learn. They knew what it meant to be truly cold, and so they knew what it meant to be truly warm. They knew the difference between survival and comfort, between need and luxury, in ways that your centrally heated age has forgotten. The fire before you burns lower now, the logs settling into themselves, transforming from wood into coals, from flame into ember. You watch this transformation, this slow descent from bright burning into quieter, steadier heat. The chambermaid who was here before, or the ghost of her, or the memory of her, understood this transformation, knew that coals often provided better, more lasting warmth than flames, knew that a properly maintained fire evolved through the night, shifting from the brightness needed at evening to the steady heat needed through the dark hours before dawn. You find yourself thinking of the night watches, the servants whose task was to maintain fires through the hours when others slept. They moved through silent corridors, carrying wood and implements, tending hearths in chamber after chamber, ensuring that no fire died completely, that no room fell into the dangerous cold that could come with the deepest night. They were invisible presences, rarely mentioned in records, but absolutely essential to the survival of everyone who slept warm and safe in their beds. What was it like, you wonder, to be one of those servants, to be awake and working while the castle around you slept? To move through darkness with only your lamp or candle for light, to enter chamber after chamber, each with its own particular configuration of warmth and cold, each requiring its own specific care? Did they resent this work, these long cold hours when everyone else rested? Or did they take pride in it, in being the guardians of warmth, the protectors who kept winter at bay while others dreamed? You have no answer, can have no answer, because these servants left no records of their thoughts, no diaries or letters describing their experiences. They are present in history only as numbers in household accounts, as titles without names, as functions rather than individuals. But their labor made possible everything else: the governance, the diplomacy, the culture, the very survival of the court. Without them, the kings and queens they served would have frozen in their beds, would have died as surely as any peasant in an unheated cottage. This, perhaps, is the deepest truth you have uncovered in this long exploration. Warmth in winter was never something a monarch achieved alone. It required systems, required hierarchy, required the coordination of countless individuals performing countless tasks. From the forester who marked trees for cutting to the groom who carried the king's chamber pot away in the cold dawn. It required money and power, yes, but it also required knowledge and skill, required the kind of expertise that could be developed only through years of practice and attention. The chamber around you seems to pulse now with this awareness, seems filled with the invisible presence of all those who labored to keep it warm. You can almost hear them, the footsteps in the corridor, the whisper of fabric as curtains are adjusted, the quiet words exchanged between servants coordinating their efforts. This room was never empty, never truly silent, because maintaining it required constant human attention, constant vigilance against the cold that waited always just beyond the walls. You crossed to the bed, running your hand along the covers, feeling their weight and texture. Wool and fur, linen and velvet, layer upon layer, each chosen for its particular properties, each positioned in a specific order to maximize warmth. The person who slept in this bed, some king or queen whose name you may know from history books, lay beneath these covers unaware, perhaps, of all the thought and labor that had gone into their preparation. Or perhaps they were aware, perhaps they understood and appreciated the system of care that surrounded them. You think of Elizabeth again, that aging queen moving from chamber to chamber, always seeking better warmth, never quite finding it. Did she understand what you understand now, standing in this room, feeling the heat of the fire at your back and the cold of winter pressing against the window? Did she recognize the limits of what her wealth and power could achieve against the season? Did she feel gratitude toward the servants who tried so hard to keep her warm? Or did she simply expect it as her due, as the natural order of things? The historical record gives no clear answer. It tells you she was intelligent, educated, capable of great subtlety in diplomacy and great firmness in governance. It tells you she valued loyalty and punished betrayal, that she could be generous with favorites and ruthless with enemies. But it does not tell you whether she understood the daily labor that kept her alive through winter, whether she saw the servants who tended her fires, or whether they were invisible to her, as they are invisible in most historical accounts. You want to believe she understood. You want to imagine her noticing, acknowledging, perhaps even thanking the chambermaid who prepared her bed, the page who tended her fire. But you know this is projection, is your own desire for a past that was more aware than it likely was. The truth is probably simpler and sadder, that most monarchs accepted their comfort without much thought, the way you accept the warmth of your own home without considering the systems that provide it. The fire shifts again, and you turn back to it, drawn by its motion and light. The coals glow now with an intensity that seems almost alive, seems conscious and purposeful. You remember reading once that some medieval people believed fires possessed spirits, that the warmth they gave was not just a physical phenomenon, but a gift from entities that inhabited the flames. You do not believe this, of course, but standing here in the quiet chamber, watching the coals pulse with light and heat, you can understand why such beliefs arose. There is something animate about a good fire, something that seems to respond and interact, that seems to have moods and needs and preferences. The people who tended these fires knew them intimately, could read in the color and motion of flames what the fire needed, whether more wood or more air, whether it was burning too hot or too cool, whether it would last through the night or die before dawn. This was knowledge born of necessity, refined through practice, essential to survival. And it was knowledge that belonged primarily to the lower ranks, to the servants and workers who spent their lives in proximity to fire, who understood it in ways their social superiors rarely did. So perhaps there was a kind of power in this knowledge, a kind of leverage that the powerful depended on whether they acknowledged it or not. The servant who knew how to keep a difficult fire burning, how to warm a chamber that defeated others, how to maintain comfort through the worst cold. That servant was valuable, perhaps even irreplaceable. There must have been some who understood this, who took quiet pride in their expertise, who knew they possessed skills that no amount of wealth or rank could purchase without their cooperation. You settle back into the chair, feeling suddenly tired, feeling the weight of all you have witnessed and understood in this long journey through winter chambers and cold halls. The warmth of the fire soaks into you. and you let yourself relax into it. Let yourself simply feel it without analyzing, without trying to understand or explain. This is what they sought, these kings and queens, in the end, not just the fact of warmth, but this feeling, this sensation of being held by heat, of being protected against the cold, of being safe. Safety. Perhaps that is the word that encompasses everything you have learned. Warmth in winter was about safety, about survival, about the fundamental human need to be protected from a natural world that could be beautiful but was often brutal, that could sustain life but could just as easily end it. The fires and furs, the tapestries and bed curtains, the heated stones and spiced wine. All of it was about creating safety, about building barriers against danger, about carving out small spaces where life could continue even when the world outside was hostile to it. And this need, this drive to create safety and warmth, belongs not just to the past, but to the present as well, to every age and every people. You seek it in your own life, though the forms have changed, though the methods are different. You seek the feeling of being warm and safe, of being protected against whatever threatens you, whether that threat is cold or something else entirely. This is the constant, the thing that connects you across centuries to those who slept in this very bed, who warmed themselves at this very hearth. The realization settles over you like an additional blanket, adding another layer to your understanding. You are not so different from them, these monarchs of the past. You face different challenges, live in a different world, but the basic human needs remain the same. You need warmth and safety, need comfort and protection, need to feel that you can survive whatever winter, literal or metaphorical, may come. Outside the window, the snow continues to fall, accumulating on the sill, blanketing the world in cold white silence. But here, in this chamber, you are warm. The fire burns, the walls hold back the wind, the curtains trap the heat. You are safe. And in this moment, in this perfect balance between the cold outside and the warmth within, you understand finally what it meant to be a king or queen in winter, what it cost and what it required, what it taught and what it demanded. The chamber seems to breathe around you, seems to hold you in its ancient warmth. And you close your eyes for a moment, letting yourself rest, letting yourself simply be here in this place where so many before you sought shelter from winter's assault. The fire crackles softly. The wind whispers at the window. And you are warm. You stand now at the threshold of understanding, your feet planted on stones that have absorbed centuries of carefully tended warmth, your breath mingling with air that has been heated and reheated by methods both ancient and ingenious. And as the final pieces of this long winter puzzle settle into place, you begin to see not just how royalty kept warm, but what that warmth meant, how it shaped power, how it defined comfort, how it separated the exalted from the ordinary in ways both visible and invisible. The great halls and private chambers you have moved through have taught you their secrets slowly, deliberately, and now you carry within you the weight of that knowledge. The texture of velvet against skin, the scent of applewood burning low, the peculiar silence that comes when snow falls outside windows hung with wool and lined with shutters crafted to exclude every whisper of winter wind. You have learned that warmth for kings and queens was never simple, never merely a matter of lighting a fire and huddling near it as common folk might do in their cottages and workshops, but rather an elaborate architecture of heat, a carefully orchestrated system that required the labor of dozens, the resources of forests and mines, the skills of craftsmen who understood not just fire but air, not just stone but the spaces between stones, not just fabric but the science of layering and insulation that would not be formally studied for centuries, yet was already understood in the hands and backs of those who served. And now, as winter deepens around the palaces and castles you have wandered through in your mind, you begin to understand how these systems reach their peak, how they worked in concert, how every element you have encountered, the hypocausts and braziers, the tapestries and bed curtains, the furred robes and heated stones, formed not separate solutions but a single continuous answer to the eternal question of cold. The Danish court where you find yourself on this particular winter evening represents the culmination of northern ingenuity, a place where the battle against winter was not merely fought but studied with the intensity of military strategy. Because here, in these latitudes where darkness claimed the day and ice claimed the sea, warmth was not luxury but necessity, not comfort but survival elevated to an art form. You move through corridors where the walls themselves have been designed as thermal barriers, their thickness not merely defensive against siege engines, but against the more relentless siege of cold that began in October and did not lift until May. And you notice how every surface, every material, Every spatial decision reflects centuries of accumulated wisdom about heat and its preservation. The stones beneath your feet are not the thin flagstones of southern palaces, but massive blocks of granite, dense and thick, capable of absorbing heat from the systems below and radiating it back slowly, steadily, throughout the endless night. In the Queen's winter chamber, you witness the full integration of all the heating methods you have encountered on this long journey, and here, finally, you see how they work not in isolation but in harmony, each compensating for the weaknesses of the others, each amplifying the strengths. The room is not large. Deliberately so, you realize, because even royalty understood that a smaller space held heat more efficiently than a vast hall, and so the most private chambers, the places where kings and queens actually slept and dressed and lived their most intimate hours, were proportioned not for grandeur but for warmth. The walls rise only 12 feet, the ceiling beamed with heavy oak that traps rising heat and prevents it from escaping into unused space above, and every surface is covered layered, insulated with materials chosen for their thermal properties as much as their beauty. You notice first the fireplace, which dominates one wall, but does so with a different character than the massive hearths of the great halls you have visited before. This fire is contained within a structure of soapstone, a material you have seen before but never in such quantity or such careful arrangement. And as you draw closer, you feel the heat radiating from the stone itself, not just the flames, a deep and even warmth that speaks to hours of burning, to the stone's remarkable capacity to absorb heat and release it slowly over time. The fireplace is taller than it is wide, built in the northern style with a narrow opening and a deep firebox that extends back into the wall, and you understand that this design creates a more complete combustion, burning the wood more thoroughly and extracting more heat from every log, while the tall structure allows the hot gases to rise slowly, transferring more of their warmth to the soapstone before escaping up the flue. The fire itself burns with the particular character of carefully selected fuel. You see birch logs at the base, chosen for their steady heat and pleasant scent, topped with smaller pieces of apple and cherry wood that release their sweeter smoke into the room. And the flames are neither roaring nor flickering, but maintaining that perfect middle state of established combustion that requires no immediate tending, that can be left for an hour or more before needing fresh wood. The ash bed below the burning logs is deep and well maintained, creating insulation beneath the fire that forces more heat forward into the room rather than down into the stonework below. And you notice the arrangement of the andirons, positioned to hold the logs at precisely the right angle for optimal airflow without allowing excessive draft that would waste heat up the chimney. But the soapstone fireplace, efficient as it is, represents only one layer of the heating system in this royal chamber, and as you turn slowly, your eyes adjusting to the soft light of candles and the warm glow reflecting off golden surfaces, you begin to identify the other elements that maintain this cocoon of warmth against the winter darkness pressing at the windows. In the corner opposite the fireplace stands a cakelugn, a tile stove of Swedish design that has gained favor in the courts of Northern Europe for its extraordinary efficiency and beauty, and this specimen is magnificent. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, its surface covered in glazed ceramic tiles depicting scenes of summer, gardens in full bloom, sun-warmed landscapes that serve as visual comfort as much as the stove itself provides physical warmth. You approach the tile stove and immediately feel the difference between its heat and that of the open fireplace. Where the fireplace radiates with immediate intensity, hottest near the flames and cooler with distance, the cakelugn emanates an even, gentle warmth from its entire surface, from the tiles at the base to those near the ceiling, and when you carefully place your palm near the glazed surface, you feel heat that is substantial but not burning, warm enough to take the chill from your hands but not so hot that you must pull away. This, you understand, is the genius of the tile stove design. The fire burns within a complex internal structure of channels and chambers, and the hot gases from combustion are forced to travel a long, winding path through the stove's body before finally exiting through the flue. And in that journey, they transfer their heat to the ceramic mass, which then radiates that warmth outward for hours after the fire itself has died to embers. The stove is fed not from this chamber, but from an adjacent service room, a brilliant design that you have seen hinted at in other palaces, but never so perfectly executed. And this arrangement means that the loading of fuel, with its inevitable influx of cold air and the mess of bark and ash, never disturbs the carefully maintained climate of the Queen's private space. Through the wall, invisible from this side, a servant tends the fire, adding split logs to the firebox every few hours according to a schedule maintained as precisely as the changing of the guard, and that servant must be skilled not just in building fire but in reading it, in understanding when the stove has absorbed enough heat and when it needs more fuel, in maintaining the perfect balance that keeps the tiles warm but never dangerously hot, comfortable but never stifling. Between the fireplace and the tile stove, you notice a third source of heat, one that surprises you with its ancient lineage appearing here in this 16th century chamber. A brazier, but not the simple metal bowl you might have encountered in earlier centuries. This brazier is an elaborate affair of brass and copper, standing on 3 legs wrought into the shapes of lions, its bowl deep and lined with clay to protect the metal from direct contact with the coals. And within it glows a bed of charcoal so perfectly prepared that it emits almost no smoke, only heat and the faintest shimmer of air rising like water. The charcoal has been made from hardwood, heated in an oxygen-starved environment until it became nearly pure carbon, and it burns now with an efficiency that wood cannot match, providing concentrated warmth without flame, without smoke, without the crackling and popping that might disturb the queen's rest. The placement of this brazier is strategic. It sits near the center of the room, equidistant from the walls, and you realize it serves as a supplement to the more fixed heating sources, a mobile point of warmth that can be adjusted, moved closer to wherever the queen might be sitting or standing, then moved back when its heat becomes too intense. The brass and copper construction serves not only aesthetic purposes but practical ones. These metals conduct heat excellently, and the entire body of the brazier becomes warm, expanding the radius of comfort it provides, while the decorative piercing in the metal allows heat to radiate in patterns, creating moving light on the walls as the coals shift and settle. Above the brazier hangs a small copper pot suspended on an adjustable chain, and you see steam rising gently from it, understanding immediately its purpose. The brazier heats not only the air but water, adding humidity to the atmosphere that would otherwise become painfully dry from the multiple fire sources, and that moisture carries with it the scent of whatever herbs have been added to the water. You breathe in carefully and detect lavender, rosemary, perhaps a hint of rose petals dried from summer, and these scents do more than please the nose. They create an olfactory warmth, a sense of comfort that works on the mind as much as the fires work on the body, reminding the inhabitants of seasons past and seasons that will come again, holding back the psychological weight of winter as much as the physical cold. The windows of this chamber demonstrate another layer of the comprehensive approach to warmth that characterizes royal living spaces in these northern climates, and as you move toward them, you see that they are not the single glazed openings common even in many noble houses, but something more sophisticated. The glass itself, expensive, precious, still slightly wavy and imperfect, sits within frames that hold not one pane but 2, separated by a gap of perhaps an inch, creating an insulating layer of trapped air that greatly reduces the transfer of cold from outside to inside. This innovation, relatively new in your time here, represents an understanding of heat loss that is becoming more sophisticated with each generation, moving from the simple blocking of wind to the more subtle prevention of conduction and the management of the invisible mechanisms by which warmth escapes. But the windows are not left to do their work alone, and as evening deepens toward night, you watch as a servant enters quietly. So quietly you hardly notice until she is already moving about her task, and begins to close the interior shutters that have been folded back into recesses during the day. These shutters are not simple wooden panels but carefully crafted assemblies, their interior surfaces covered with fabric over a layer of wool batting, creating yet another barrier against the cold, and when they are folded across the windows and secured with their brass latches, the room's sense of enclosure becomes complete, not oppressive but protective, a fortress against winter that feels secure rather than confining. Between the closed shutters and the windows themselves, exists a space of trapped air, another insulating layer, and the servant adjusts each shutter carefully to ensure no gaps remain where cold might seep through. And you notice that the reveal around the windows, the space between glass and interior wall, is deep, nearly 18 inches, providing additional buffering distance between outside and inside. The thickness of the walls here serves not just structural purposes but thermal ones, and you run your hand along the interior surface, feeling plaster that has been mixed with hair and straw for insulation, applied over stones that themselves are dense and thick, and behind those stones, the cavity is filled with rubble and sand, materials chosen because they conduct heat poorly and trap warm air effectively. The floor beneath your feet represents another element of the warming strategy, And here you see the influence of Roman hypocaust technology, adapted to northern conditions and medieval construction methods. The floor is not directly on the ground, but elevated above a space. You cannot see it, but you know it is there, where warm air from a basement furnace rises through vents controlled by metal plates that can be opened or closed to adjust the amount of heat entering the room. The floor surface itself is wood, not stone, because wood feels warmer to the touch and provides better insulation, and over that would lie layers of covering. First a thick pad of felted wool, then over that, carpets that have come from Turkey or Persia, woven with such density that they add substantially to the insulation while their rich colors bring visual warmth to match the physical. You kneel and touch the carpet, feeling the thickness of the pile, noticing how your hand sinks into the wool, and you understand that every element in this room has been chosen and placed with thermal consciousness. Nothing is merely decorative. Everything serves the paramount purpose of maintaining warmth while simultaneously fulfilling aesthetic and social functions. The carpet is beautiful, certainly, its patterns speaking of distant lands and skilled artisans, but it is here because it traps air, because it prevents the transfer of any chill from the floor to feet and body, because it can be layered in winter and removed in summer, adjusting the room's character with the seasons. The walls, too, show the full integration of beauty and function that characterizes royal approaches to winter comfort, and here you see the tapestries you have encountered before but in their fullest deployment. Not one or two hangings, but an entire circuit of textile covering every wall surface from chair rail height to the ceiling, and between the tapestries and the plaster, exists another gap, a space of still air created by the way the tapestries are hung from rods set out from the wall on iron brackets. This air gap serves the same purpose as the space behind the shutters and between the double glazing. It intercepts cold before it can fully penetrate into the living space, creating a buffer zone that moderates temperature transfer. The particular tapestries in this chamber depict scenes of domestic life rather than hunting or warfare, and you find yourself drawn to them, walking slowly along the walls, reading their woven stories while feeling the warmth they help maintain. Here is a scene of harvest, peasants bringing in wheat under a golden autumn sun, and there is a winter feast, nobles gathered around a table laden with foods that speak of abundance and celebration, and next is a spring garden, ladies walking among flowers while musicians play, and finally summer, a tournament with pennants flying and crowds watching in the warm sunshine. The cycle of seasons decorates this winter room, holding within it the promise that cold is temporary, that the wheel turns, that warmth will come again in its own time. But beyond their imagery, the tapestries serve their practical purpose with quiet efficiency. You step close to one and feel the air near it, noticing how it is slightly cooler than the air in the center of the room, understanding that the tapestry is intercepting cold radiating from the stone wall behind it, absorbing and holding that cold in its layered fibers before it can reach the interior space. The weaving is dense enough to prevent air movement, blocking drafts that might find their way through mortar joints or around stone edges. Yet the wool retains warmth that reaches it from the room side, creating a gradient that favors heat retention over heat loss. The bed, the great state bed that dominates the far end of the chamber, represents perhaps the ultimate expression of the medieval and Renaissance approach to personal warmth. And as you approach it, you begin to understand that this piece of furniture is not merely a place to sleep, but a room within a room. A microenvironment designed to maintain a zone of warmth so effective that even without any fire at all, a person within it would remain comfortable through the coldest night. The bed stands on a raised platform, lifting the sleeping surface above the floor where cold air settles, and the platform itself is enclosed, creating storage space below, but also trapping warmer air above, preventing circulation that would draw heat downward. The frame of the bed is massive oak, dark with age and polish, and from it hang curtains of such weight and thickness that they transform the interior into something like a tent, a fabric room sealed on all sides when the curtains are drawn. These curtains are not single layers but multiple, an outer layer of heavy velvet in deep crimson, lined with wool, and then an inner layer of linen for the warmer months that can be used alone when the velvet would be too heavy. The curtains hang from rods that form a complete rectangle around the bed, and when closed, they overlap generously, leaving no gaps where warmth might escape or cold draft enter. And at each corner is a tie that can hold the curtains open during the day when the bed is being aired and made, then released at night to create full enclosure. Inside the curtained space, the bed itself is an architecture of warming layers, and you imagine, though you do not presume to disturb the carefully made surface, what it must be like to sleep here on a winter night. The mattress rests not on simple ropes, but on a base of boards that prevent air circulation from below, and that mattress is not a single thin pad, but a construction of multiple layers. First, a foundation mattress stuffed with straw for basic support and insulation from the boards. Then a second mattress filled with wool for softness and warmth. And finally, for the queen herself, a feather bed, a thick covering filled with down that has been collected and cleaned and fluffed until it achieves that magical combination of warmth and lightness that made such beds the mark of highest luxury. The sheets are linen, fine and smooth, but in winter they are not the only layer touching the sleeper. Between the bottom sheet and the feather bed lies a blanket of soft wool, creating warmth immediately around the body, and over the top sheet are more blankets. Thick wool ones woven in patterns that identify their regions of origin, Scottish plaids and Irish weaves and English broadcloths, each adding weight and warmth, and over all of these, the final layer, a coverlet of quilted silk filled with more down, lightweight but incredibly insulating, trapping body heat and keeping the sleeper warm without oppressive weight that makes movement difficult or sleep restless. At the head of the bed are pillows, not just one or two but many, allowing the sleeper to arrange them for comfort, and these too are filled with down or, for firmer support, with wool, and each has its linen case covered with an embroidered case that protects the pillow and adds another tiny layer of insulation. Near the pillows, you notice a small item that speaks to the comprehensive attention paid to comfort. A bed cap, made of linen and lined with soft wool, designed to cover the head during sleep and prevent heat loss from that most vulnerable area. And beside it, a bed jacket, a light robe that can be worn if one needs to sit up in the night, maintaining warmth without the need to fully dress. And yet even this remarkable bed, with all its layers and enclosures, does not work alone. And you notice that beside it stands a small table, and on that table sits a bed warmer, a brass pan with a long wooden handle and a lid pierced with decorative holes. This device, would be filled with hot coals from the fireplace or brazier, then carefully run between the sheets before the queen retires, warming the linens so that she does not enter a cold bed, but rather slides into fabric that is already pleasant to the touch, and the psychological comfort of this small luxury perhaps equals its physical benefit, turning the moment of going to bed from a cold shock to be endured into a warm embrace to be welcomed. On the table beside the bed warmer sits another item, a stone bottle, glazed stoneware with a stopper, and you understand its purpose immediately. This is for hot water, filled from the ever-heating pots that hang in the kitchen, wrapped in cloth to prevent burning, and placed at the foot of the bed where it radiates gentle warmth through the night, keeping toes comfortable in that extremity most prone to chill. And in the morning, that same water, still warm enough, can be used for washing, heated overnight at no additional cost of fuel or labor. An elegant efficiency that speaks to centuries of practical experience. The clothing that royal persons wore in their private chambers during winter represents another layer of the warming system. And you see, laid across a chair near the fireplace, the sort of garments that would never appear in formal portraits, but were essential to daily comfort. There is a bedgown, a loose robe of quilted silk over wool batting, designed to be worn over the nightgown when rising in the morning before fully dressing, providing warmth during the vulnerable transition between bed and day clothes, and beside it, a pair of slippers lined with fur, not the thin-soled shoes worn in public, but thick, insulating footwear that protects against any chill from the floor despite all the carpets and heating systems below. You notice also a shawl of exceptional fineness, woven from the wool of mountain goats into a fabric so light it might float on air, yet so warm that wrapped around the shoulders it creates a microclimate of comfort. And this garment, like so many elements of royal warming, represents the convergence of the finest materials and most skilled craftsmanship, brought together in service of comfort. The shawl is not merely functional but beautiful, its weave creating patterns of subtle complexity, its edges finished with silk thread in complementary colors. Because even in the privacy of the winter chamber, even in garments worn only by candlelight and firelight, the aesthetic standards of royalty demanded beauty alongside utility. The candles themselves, you notice, contribute to the room's warmth in ways both obvious and subtle, and there are many of them, in wall sconces, in standing candelabra, on tables and mantels, providing light certainly, but also providing heat, each flame a tiny furnace, and together they add measurably to the warmth of the space. These are not tallow candles with their smoking and smell, but fine beeswax, burning clean and bright, and the very scent of the beeswax adds to the sense of comfort, a sweet honey smell that blends with the herb-scented steam from the brazier and the wood smoke from the fireplace into an olfactory experience that defines warmth as much as any physical sensation. The light from the candles, multiplied by mirrors and reflected by polished metal surfaces, by the gold threads in the tapestries and the glazed surface of the tile stove, creates a visual warmth that affects mood and perception, making the room feel not just physically heated, but psychologically warm, welcoming, comfortable in ways that transcend temperature alone. The golden glow touches every surface, softening edges, creating shadows that suggest rather than reveal. And in this light, the room becomes not just a heated space, but a refuge, a sanctuary from the dark and cold that exists beyond the thick walls and closed shutters. You turn slowly, taking in the full integration of all these elements. The fireplace and tile stove and brazier, the windows with their double glazing and interior shutters, the floor with its underfloor heating and layers of carpets, the walls with their tapestries and air gaps, the bed with its curtains and layers of coverings, the clothing and accessories designed for warmth, the candles and their contributing heat and light. And you understand finally that warmth for kings and queens was achieved not through any single technology or method, but through the comprehensive application of every technique available, layered and combined and carefully managed to create an environment that could hold back winter's worst while maintaining livability, even comfort. And yet, even with all these systems in place, even with the wealth and resources to implement them fully, you understand that winter was never completely defeated, that even in the best heated royal chambers, there were cold corners and draft-prone spots, that the chill found ways to creep in through the invisible cracks and gaps that exist in any building, that the battle against winter was continuous, requiring constant attention and adjustment, fresh fuel and tending of fires and closing of curtains and adding of layers. The servants who maintained these systems worked through the night in shifts, monitoring fires and adjusting vents, ensuring that warmth never failed, that the king or queen never woke to a cold room, and their labor, invisible and unrecorded, was as essential to royal comfort as any architectural feature or technological innovation. You move to the window and carefully open just one shutter, peering out through the old glass into the winter night, and what you see confirms everything you have been sensing. Snow falling heavily, driven by wind that howls around the corners of the palace, and beyond the immediate grounds, darkness, complete and cold, and you think of the villages and farmsteads scattered across the landscape, where fires are smaller and less carefully tended, where blankets are thinner and fewer, where walls are not 3 feet thick and floors are not heated from below, where winter is not a challenge to be overcome with unlimited resources, but a hardship to be endured with whatever means are available. The contrast clarifies the meaning of royal warmth. It was not merely about physical comfort, but about the demonstration of power, the ability to create summer and winter, to hold back the forces that afflicted common people, to live in a different climate than one's subjects even while occupying the same geographical space. To walk through a palace in winter wearing light clothing while outside the world froze was to make visible the invisible structures of power and privilege, to show in the most immediate and physical way possible the difference between those who ruled and those who served, those who commanded resources and those who provided them. And yet, you think closing the shutter and turning back to the warmth of the room. There is something universal in the human need for warmth, something that transcends status and wealth, and even the most elaborate royal heating systems are, at their core, more sophisticated versions of what every human seeks: shelter from cold, comfort against the harshness of winter, the ability to survive and even thrive in climates that challenge the body's ability to maintain its essential temperature. The kings and queens solved this problem with resources and technology far beyond what most could access, but the problem itself, the need itself, was the same one felt in every cottage and workshop, every monastery and manor house, every place where humans have chosen or been forced to live in regions where winter brings real cold. You settle into a chair near the tile stove, feeling its gentle radiant heat, and you let your mind wander across the centuries you have traversed in this long exploration of warmth and power, winter and ingenuity. You remember the Roman hypocausts with their underfloor passages and external furnaces, the Byzantine braziers glowing in throne rooms, the medieval great halls with their central hearths and smoke-filled air, the development of chimneys and their transformation of interior spaces, the increasing sophistication of fireplace design and the materials used in their construction, the introduction of glazed windows and the evolution toward double glazing, the use of textiles not just for decoration, but for insulation, the design of clothing, and especially sleeping arrangements to conserve body heat. And now, here in this 16th century chamber, the integration of all these innovations into a comprehensive system that represents the peak of pre-industrial heating technology. And you understand, sitting in this carefully warmed space, that you are witnessing the end of an era as much as the culmination of one. Because beyond your time here, beyond this winter night in this northern palace, lie changes that will transform how humans heat their spaces. The development of cast iron stoves that will be more efficient than any masonry fireplace. The understanding of thermodynamics and heat transfer that will make heating scientific rather than empirical, the industrial revolution that will bring coal and eventually oil and gas and electricity, the technologies of forced air and central heating and thermostatic control that will make warmth not something carefully maintained by constant attention, but something adjusted by the turn of a dial or the programming of a computer. But in this moment, in this room, those changes are still future, still unimagined, and what exists is the culmination of everything humans have learned about warmth through trial and error, through observation and innovation, through the accumulation of wisdom passed from builder to builder, from servant to servant, from generation to generation. The fire in the hearth burns with knowledge that is hundreds of years old. The tapestries hang according to principles discovered through centuries of cold winters and careful observation. The bed is designed according to an understanding of insulation and air circulation that was never written in books, but was encoded in the practices of those who made and arranged such things. Outside, the wind continues to drive snow against the windows, and inside, the warmth holds steady, maintained by the multiple systems working in concert, by the thermal mass of stone and ceramic slowly releasing stored heat, by the insulation of fabric and air gaps preventing loss, by the fresh fuel added to fire and stove on their careful schedules, by the attention of servants who have been trained to read the subtle signs of temperature change, and to respond before discomfort can establish itself. You close your eyes and simply feel it all, the radiant warmth from the tile stove on your right side, the more intense heat from the fireplace to your left, the gentle warmth rising from the floor, the absence of draft, the soft weight of warm air that seems to wrap around you like an invisible blanket. And in this feeling, in this comprehensive experience of warmth maintained against winter's assault, you find something like peace, something like safety, the deep mammalian satisfaction of being warm when the world is cold, of being protected when the world is harsh, of being, for this moment at least, completely comfortable in body, even as your mind continues to work, to understand, to appreciate the complexity and care that has created this sanctuary. This, you think, is what kings and queens bought with their wealth and power. Not merely heat, not merely the absence of cold, but this sense of complete thermal security. This feeling that winter has been not just held at bay but actually reversed, that within these walls, within these layers of protection, the season is not winter at all, but something closer to spring, gentle and welcoming and kind. The night deepens, and you watch as a servant enters again, moving with practiced silence, and this time she comes to adjust the fire, to add fresh logs to the soapstone fireplace, and you observe the skill with which she works. First using a poker to arrange the existing logs, creating space for the new ones while maintaining good airflow, then selecting logs from the basket beside the hearth, choosing sizes that will burn steadily rather than too fast or too slow, placing them carefully so they will catch from the existing fire without smothering it, and finally adjusting the fire screen to protect the room from any sparks while still allowing heat to radiate outward. The entire operation takes perhaps 3 minutes, and when she leaves as silently as she came, the fire has been renewed without any disruption to the room's warmth or atmosphere, a seamless maintenance that ensures continuity of comfort. You understand that this scene has played out thousands of times in this room and millions of times across all the palaces and castles of Europe and beyond, that the maintenance of royal warmth was a constant activity, an unending cycle of fuel and tending, of adjustment and monitoring, that behind every warm royal chamber stood a network of labor. Woodcutters in the forest, carters bringing fuel to the palace, storekeepers maintaining supplies, fire tenders working through the night and beyond. Them, the craftspeople who made the tools and equipment, the miners who extracted the iron and copper and brass, the weavers who created the insulating textiles, the builders who laid the thick walls and constructed the complex fireplaces and stoves, the glassmakers who provided the windows, on in expanding circles of labor and skill, all ultimately in service of keeping kings and queens warm. This vast pyramid of effort and resource, all concentrated on the comfort of a few individuals at the apex of social hierarchy, speaks to the nature of pre-modern society in ways that are both fascinating and troubling, and you hold both truths together: the remarkable ingenuity and beauty of these heating systems, and the fundamental inequality that made them possible, the suffering of many that enabled the comfort of few. The warmth you feel in this room exists not in isolation, but as part of a system of power and extraction, and the very completeness of that warmth, the way it seems so natural and automatic, obscures the immense amount of labor required to create and maintain it. And yet, you think these royal innovations, these experiments in heating carried out with resources that only royalty commanded, eventually filtered down, their principles adapted and simplified, available to wider populations as technologies improved and became more affordable. The chimney, once a luxury, became standard even in modest homes. The tile stove, perfected in palaces, was adopted by burghers and eventually by peasants in modified forms. The understanding of insulation and air sealing improved buildings across all classes. The knowledge gained in heating the chambers of kings and queens ultimately benefited everyone, not through any particular generosity, but through the natural diffusion of technology and technique. So perhaps you think there is something worthwhile in studying and understanding these systems, not to glorify the inequality that made them possible, but to appreciate the human ingenuity they represent, to see in them the universal human drive to overcome environmental challenges, to create comfort and safety in a world that offers neither without effort. The specific solutions developed for royal warmth may have been enabled by wealth and power, but the underlying problems and the creative thinking applied to them belong to all humanity, part of the long story of how we have made ourselves at home in diverse and often harsh climates. You rise from the chair and move slowly around the room one more time, touching surfaces, feeling temperatures, noting details, fixing in your memory the full experience of this space and this system. Your hand on the tile stove absorbs its gentle heat. Your feet on the carpeted floor feel supported and warm. Your face, turned toward the fireplace, receives its radiant energy. Your back, to the tapestried wall, is protected from the cold that wants to seep through the stone. Every part of your body exists in a zone of comfort, and that comfort is not accidental but designed, not natural but achieved through human effort and intelligence. And as you complete your circuit of the room, returning to the window where you began, you feel ready to release this space, to let this particular chamber and this particular winter night fade into the general understanding you have gained, to carry forward not specific details, but the essential lessons. That human comfort in harsh climates requires multiple strategies working together. That warmth is never a single thing, but always a combination of heat sources and heat retention, of preventing loss as much as generating gain. That technology and technique accumulate over generations, each age building on what came before, and that the story of how we warm ourselves is ultimately a story of human adaptation and ingenuity, of our refusal to accept the limits that nature seems to impose, our insistence on making even winter a season we can not just survive, but inhabit with comfort and even grace. The candles are burning lower now, and the room has settled into its deep night configuration. The fire's banked to burn slowly through the dark hours, the stove radiating its stored heat, the closed bed waiting with its layers of warmth, and everything is in order. Everything is as it should be, a system in equilibrium, maintaining its protected climate against the winter world outside. You breathe deeply once more, drawing in the scent of wood smoke and beeswax, of wool and lavender, of warmth itself if warmth can be said to have a smell. And then you turn toward the door, ready to leave this chamber, to step back from the specific into the general, to move toward the conclusion of this long winter's journey through the heated spaces of royalty. You stand now at the threshold of spring. The winter has not yet released its final grip on the stone walls that surround you. The fires still burn in the great hearth behind you, but their urgency has diminished, transformed into something more ceremonial than essential. You can feel the shift in the air itself, that subtle yielding of cold to the first whispers of warmth that come not from hearth or brazier, but from the sun itself, climbing higher each day in its ancient arc across the pale sky. The mornings arrive earlier now. You wake before the servants enter to stoke the embers back to flame, and in that quiet hour you lie beneath furs that no longer seem quite heavy enough, quite necessary enough. The room holds a different quality of darkness, not the impenetrable black of December nights, but something softer, something that suggests the possibility of light even before dawn breaks across the leaded glass of your chamber windows. You have lived through another winter in these royal rooms. You have survived the cold as your ancestors did, with fire and fabric, with ingenuity and endurance, with the labor of countless hands you will never know and the weight of tradition you can never fully escape. In these final weeks of the cold season, you find yourself drawn to reflection rather than action. The frantic preparations of autumn seem impossibly distant now. The gathering of wood, the inspection of chimneys, the distribution of winter assignments among the household staff. All of that urgent activity has condensed into these quiet mornings when you simply exist in the space that warmth has created, a survivor of the season's siege, a keeper of fires that have burned without cease for months on end. You rise from your bed and move toward the window without bothering to wrap yourself in additional layers. The room is warm enough now, the fire having burned throughout the night under the watchful eye of the page who dozed in the corner, his duty to maintain the flames even as sleep pressed heavy upon his young shoulders. You can hear him stirring now behind you, preparing to add fresh logs before the household fully wakes, maintaining the rhythm that has governed these rooms since October's first frost. Through the thick glass you can see the gardens below, still brown and dormant, but no longer crusted with ice. The fountains remain silent, their mechanisms still vulnerable to any late freeze. But you can imagine water flowing through them again, can almost hear the sound that has been absent for so many months. The kitchen gardens show the first signs of activity. Figures moving between the beds, preparing soil, planning the growing season that will feed the household through the next cycle of seasons. Everything moves in circles here, you think. Everything returns. You remember your grandmother's words, spoken decades ago in a room much like this one, warmed by fires much like these. She told you that a monarch who cannot keep warm in winter cannot keep a kingdom in any season. At the time you thought it merely another piece of royal wisdom, the kind of aphorism that sounds profound but means little. Now you understand what she meant. The ability to maintain warmth, to command resources, to organize labor, to plan ahead and execute those plans flawlessly, demonstrates all the capacities required to govern. The king or queen who shivers in their chambers while wood rots unused in storerooms, who fails to maintain chimneys or organize fuel supplies, who cannot manage the complex hierarchy of heating a palace, cannot manage a realm. But she meant something else too, something you only now begin to grasp. She meant that the monarch must be the heart of the household's warmth, not merely its beneficiary. The fires that burn brightest in your chambers send their heat radiating outward through the palace, ensuring that the rooms of your family stay warm, that the great halls where you receive petitions and host feasts remain habitable, that the working spaces where your household staff conduct the business of the realm never become so cold that fingers stiffen and cannot perform their duties. Your warmth enables their warmth. Your survival ensures theirs. The page has finished his work with the fire now. You hear him retreat from the room with the quiet efficiency that has become second nature to him over this long winter. He has grown, you notice, taller, broader in the shoulders. The boy who entered your service in autumn is becoming something else, shaped by the discipline of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. In the spring he will likely be promoted to other duties, his place beside your fire taken by another youth who will learn the same lessons he has learned. Patience, attention, the honor found in service, the weight of responsibility for another's comfort and safety. You turn from the window and survey your chamber in the growing light. The room seems smaller now than it did in the depths of winter, though nothing about its physical dimensions has changed. Perhaps it is the light itself that creates this impression, revealing corners that shadow kept hidden, showing you the full extent of this space that has been your shelter and your fortress against the cold. The tapestries that have insulated these walls appear faded in the dawn light, their rich colors muted. You make a mental note to have them taken down and cleaned before being stored for the warmer months. The bare stone walls will breathe better without them, will release the moisture they have held through the long season of heating. The fur coverlets on your bed need the same attention. Cleaning, airing, storage in chests with herbs to keep moths away until autumn returns and you draw them out again. The braziers scattered throughout the room will be moved to storage as well, their charcoal reservoirs emptied and scrubbed, their metal surfaces polished against rust. The foot warmers and bed warmers will be inventoried and repaired where needed. The screens that have directed heat and blocked drafts will be folded and put away. All the apparatus of winter warmth will be carefully maintained and stored, an investment in next year's comfort, a hedge against future cold. You have learned that nothing about royal warmth is simple or singular. Every element connects to every other element in a web of dependency and consequence. The woodcutter's labor in distant forests connects to the fire in your hearth. The cook's ovens heating the kitchens connect to the warmth rising through floors into chambers above. The glazier's skill in fitting windows connects to the stillness of air in your rooms. The architect's knowledge of how heat moves through stone connects to the temperature at which you sleep. All of it, every piece matters. Remove one element, and the entire system becomes less effective, more vulnerable, more likely to fail when the cold grows most intense. This interconnection extends beyond the physical mechanics of warmth into the social architecture of the palace itself. The master of the household who coordinates fuel supplies depends on the clerk of the greenwood who manages forest resources. The chamberlains who tend your fires depend on the pages who carry wood and coal. The pages depend on the yeomen who store and distribute fuel. The yeomen depend on the carters who transport it. The carters depend on the foresters who cut it. And all of them, every single person in this chain of labor and responsibility, depend on you, on your authority, your resources, your planning, your attention to the systems that keep them employed and the palace functioning. When you sit in state in the Great Hall, when you receive ambassadors in rooms heated to comfortable warmth while snow falls outside, when you dine in chambers where no draft disturbs the candle flames, you embody the success of this entire complex enterprise. Foreign visitors judge your power not only by the size of your armies or the extent of your lands, but by the comfort of your palace, the efficiency of your household, the visible signs that you command both resources and the knowledge to deploy them effectively. A cold palace suggests weakness, poverty, mismanagement. A warm palace suggests the opposite, strength, wealth, control. You move through your morning routine with the ease of long practice. Servants enter at their appointed times with warmed water for washing, with breakfast kept hot in covered dishes, with messages and reports that begin each day's work of governance. You hardly notice the warmth anymore, the way you hardly notice breathing. It has become the baseline condition of your existence, the foundation upon which everything else in your life is built. Only when you venture beyond the heated core of the palace do you remember what cold feels like. And even then you are protected by layers of clothing, by fur-lined cloaks and leather gloves and boots lined with wool. But you remember the cold. Despite all these protections, despite the success of your household's warming systems, you remember what it feels like when cold penetrates to the bone. You remember winter journeys when duty required travel, and no amount of heated bricks or fur wrapping could fully protect against the wind's knife edge. You remember childhood illnesses when fever made you shiver despite the roaring fire. You remember the year a chimney collapsed, and half the royal apartments went unheatable for 3 weeks during the coldest part of January. You remember, and that memory makes you grateful for the warmth you now almost take for granted. The morning progresses. You attend to correspondence at your desk, positioned as always near enough to the fire to benefit from its heat, but far enough that the light from the window falls clear and bright on the pages before you. Your secretary reads reports aloud, accounts from your estates, petitions from towns, news from neighboring kingdoms. The business of the realm continues regardless of season, but you notice how the content shifts as winter yields to spring. Fewer reports of hardship and cold, fewer requests for fuel assistance, fewer notices of death from harsh conditions. Instead, talk turns to planting and building, to repairs put off during the frozen months, to trade and travel that will resume when the roads dry and the mountain passes clear. You sign documents and seal them with wax that drips red and hot, pressed with your signet ring. Even this small ritual involves heat, the flame that melts the wax, the warmth that keeps it soft enough to take a clear impression. You had never thought about such things before this winter, before you began truly paying attention to all the ways that heat and cold shape daily existence. Now you see it everywhere, woven into every aspect of life in these northern latitudes where winter rules for half the year. A chamberlain arrives to discuss the spring removal of winter furnishings from the state apartments. He carries a ledger listing every tapestry, every screen, every brazier, every piece of cold weather equipment currently deployed throughout the palace. Together you review the list, deciding what will be stored and what will remain in place for the cool nights that persist even into early summer. The chamberlain makes notes in his precise hand, his pen scratching softly against paper. He will convey your decisions to his staff, who will coordinate with the household officers responsible for storage and maintenance. The winter palace will gradually transform back into its summer configuration, a process requiring weeks of careful labor by dozens of workers. After the chamberlain departs, you find yourself alone again with your thoughts and the fire's quiet companionship. The flames have burned lower now, settling into a bed of glowing coals that radiate steady heat without the drama of leaping flames. This is the fire's most efficient phase, you have learned. When the wood has been reduced to coals that burn hotter and longer than the flames themselves, releasing their stored energy in a slow, controlled combustion that asks nothing but time. You consider the generations of royalty who have sat in rooms like this one, tending fires like this one, surviving winters like this one. The specific technologies have evolved. Your windows are better fitted than your great-grandfathers were. Your chimneys draw more efficiently than those of 2 centuries ago. Your understanding of how heat moves through space exceeds that of the castle's medieval builders. But the fundamental challenge remains unchanged. Winter comes. Cold threatens. Fire answers. And those with power and resources deploy them to create islands of warmth in a frozen world. What will your descendants inherit from your generation? What innovations in heating might they enjoy that you can only dimly imagine? Perhaps some new fuel source, more efficient than wood or coal. Perhaps new ways of distributing heat throughout large buildings without the need for individual fires in every room. Perhaps entirely different approaches to architecture that trap and hold warmth more effectively than thick stone walls and heavy tapestries. You will not live to see these advances if they come, but you take comfort in the thought that each generation adds its knowledge to the collective understanding, building slowly toward better solutions to ancient problems. The afternoon arrives with a change in the light that slants through your windows. The sun has moved around the palace, and the quality of illumination in your chamber shifts from the bright clarity of morning to something softer, warmer, more golden. You leave your desk and walk through the connected rooms of your private apartments, noticing details you had overlooked during the busy months of deep winter. In the presence chamber, where you receive visitors in relative privacy, you pause before a painting that hangs between 2 windows. It depicts one of your ancestors, a queen who ruled 300 years ago. She sits in a chair not unlike the ones in your own rooms, dressed in heavy velvets and ermine. Behind her, visible in the painting's background, a fire burns in a hearth remarkably similar to your own. The artist included that detail for a reason, you realize. The fire signifies more than physical warmth. It represents continuity, stability, the eternal presence of the crown providing shelter and protection to the realm. You wonder if that long-dead queen felt the same mixture of burden and satisfaction that you feel when you contemplate the complex systems required to keep a palace warm. Did she too worry about fuel supplies and chimney maintenance? Did she too feel the weight of responsibility for the comfort and survival of hundreds of household members? Did she too find unexpected satisfaction in the simple fact of a well-maintained fire burning exactly as it should, providing exactly the warmth required, asking nothing but attention and fuel? The painting offers no answers, only the silent testimony of her presence, her survival, her success in navigating the same challenges you face. She ruled, she endured, she kept the fires burning. The throne passed to her successors, who kept the fires burning in their turn, who added their own knowledge and improvements to the systems they inherited, who survived their winters and passed the crown forward again. And now it is your turn to be the keeper of the flame, the maintainer of warmth, the one whose vigilance ensures that the cold remains outside where it belongs. You continue through your apartments, your progress tracked by servants who maintain a respectful distance, always present but never intrusive unless summoned. In the bedchamber you pause again before the great hearth that has been the center of your nighttime warmth throughout the long season. The stones surrounding the firebox are discolored by months of intense heat, their surface altered by the endless cycle of heating and cooling. The metal fixtures, andirons, great fire tools, show signs of wear despite regular maintenance. Everything that serves the fire is marked by that service, changed by prolonged exposure to heat. The same is true of you, you realize. This winter has left its marks, visible and invisible. You move differently now than you did in autumn, more slowly perhaps, more carefully, with an awareness of comfort and discomfort that you did not possess before. You notice temperature constantly now, attuned to every draft and every warm pocket of air. You appreciate the labor of others more deeply, having spent months observing the endless work required to maintain warmth. You understand in your bones, not just your mind, how precarious comfort is, how much effort stands between survival and suffering when winter rules the world outside these walls. The evening arrives with its familiar rituals. Servants enter to build up the fires for the night, adding fresh logs that will burn for hours while you sleep. Additional braziers are brought in and lit, their charcoal glowing orange in the gathering dusk. Candles are kindled throughout your chambers, adding their small warmth to the larger heat of hearth and brazier. The windows are checked one final time to ensure that no gap admits cold night air. The bed is prepared with warming pans that have been heated in the coals, chasing away any lingering chill from the linens. You take your evening meal in your chambers rather than in the great hall. The food arrives hot, protected on its journey from the kitchens by covered dishes and heated boxes. You eat slowly, savoring not just the flavors but the warmth itself. The heat of soup against your palms when you lift the bowl, the steam that rises from roasted meat, the comfort of warm bread and mulled wine. Even eating is an experience of warmth. You realize a way of bringing heat into your very body, fueling the internal fires that keep you alive. After the meal is cleared away, you sit for a while in your favorite chair, positioned at the precise angle before the fire where warmth and light balance perfectly. You have no pressing work tonight, no reports to review or documents to sign. You simply sit, watching the flames dance across the logs, feeling the heat radiate against your face and hands, listening to the soft snap and crackle of burning wood. This is what you have fought for all winter. Not just physical warmth, but this moment of peace, this sense of security, this deep relaxation that comes only when you know yourself to be safe and comfortable and protected against the elements. Your thoughts drift across the months just past, reviewing the season like a general reviewing a successful campaign. You remember the first cold nights of October when the fires were lit after months of dormancy. Remember the satisfaction of watching flames catch and spread. Remember the relief of feeling warmth return to rooms that had grown too cool. You remember the deep freeze of January when every system was tested to its limit and held. Remember the pride you felt in your household's preparation and competence. You remember February's exhaustion, the weariness that came from months of constant vigilance. Remember pushing through that fatigue, because winter was not yet finished demanding your attention. And now March, with its promise of spring, with its subtle warming, with its suggestion that the worst has passed and survival is assured. You have made it through. The palace stands warm. The household thrives. The fires still burn, will continue burning until they are no longer needed, until the season turns fully and you can allow them to die down at last, their duty discharged, their service complete. But not yet. The nights are still cold enough to require heating. The morning frosts still threaten. Winter may be weakening, but it has not yet surrendered entirely. So the fires continue, and you continue your vigil, maintaining the systems that have served you so well, refusing to relax your attention until the season truly turns. A servant enters quietly to check the fires and add more wood where needed. You watch him work, noting the practiced efficiency of his movements, the way he handles the tools with casual competence born of long experience. He has tended these fires since autumn, night after night, keeping the flames alive through the darkest hours. He knows these hearths better than you do, knows their quirks and personalities, knows exactly how much wood they need, and when, knows how to coax the best performance from each one. When he finishes and withdraws, you thank him quietly. He seems surprised by the acknowledgement. Royalty rarely speaks directly to lower servants, but he bows and murmurs his appreciation before departing. You make a mental note to ensure that the servants who have tended your fires throughout the winter receive some recognition when the season officially ends. A small bonus perhaps, or an extra day of rest, some tangible acknowledgement of their labor and dedication. They have earned it. The night deepens. You prepare for sleep with the usual rituals, washing in water that servants have warmed, changing into night clothes that have been kept near the fire, climbing into a bed that has been thoroughly warmed by hot bricks wrapped in flannel. The page who will maintain the fire through the night takes his position in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, armed with fresh logs stacked within easy reach. You exchange brief goodnights, a small acknowledgement of the partnership that keeps you safe and warm while you sleep. Lying in the darkness with the fire's glow painting the walls in shades of amber and orange, you feel the winter releasing its grip not just on the physical world, but on your mind as well. The constant awareness of cold that has occupied some portion of your thoughts since October begins to fade, replaced by anticipation of spring, of warmth that comes from the sun rather than from fire, of days when you can move through the palace without thinking about temperature at all. But you will remember this winter, you know. You will carry forward the lessons it has taught you about preparation and vigilance, about the value of competent staff and well-maintained systems, about the connection between comfort and authority, between warmth and the power to govern effectively. When next autumn arrives and the first cold winds begin to blow, you will be ready. You will apply what you have learned to make next winter even more comfortable, even more efficient, even more secure. These rooms will be warm again. You promise yourself drowsily as sleep begins to claim you. The fires will burn again. The household will gather again around the hearths and braziers that make life possible in this northern palace. The cycle will continue, as it has continued for generations, as it will continue for generations to come. Winter will return, and you will be ready for it, armed with knowledge and experience, protected by stone and fire and the labor of hundreds of hands. The fire crackles softly in the darkness, a sound you have heard so often that it has become almost like silence, a background presence that signifies safety and normalcy. Your eyes grow heavy. The warmth surrounds you like an embrace, holding you gently as you drift toward sleep. Tomorrow will bring new duties, new decisions, new demands on your attention. But tonight there is only this: the warm bed, the burning fire, the faithful servant keeping watch, the ancient stone walls holding back the cold. You sleep, and the fires burn on through the night, as they have burned through every night of this long winter, as they will burn through the final nights of the season until spring arrives in full and releases you from the need for constant warmth.